Put your agenda right here. There's like a message.
Nope.
I think you'll.
Okay, recording and transcription started. Can I have everybody's attention, please? I've started the recording and transcription for the meeting. Those of you with laptops, if you could mute, that will help the sound. Thank you very much. And we're ready to take away whenever whoever's first in the chairs.
Jim, I think that's going to be me.
Okay.
I don't know how you're doing in terms of whether there are folks still coming into the room. If you want me to still wait the couple of minutes until we hit high 1 o'clock, or if you feel like we're ready to go ahead and get started.
Why don't we give it to right to 1 o'clock, and then we can get started a couple minutes from now.
Perfect. I'm going to need to rely on you, and if I see Brian, is that Brian Burrows? Is that you in the room? Good, very good. To help me out to figure out if we've got in-person quorum, and I apologize that I am not there to add to the in-person quorum.
I think we're under, we don't have it. I know.
Yeah.
Unless like 3 people or so come in, I don't think.
Okay.
Travis is here, so we can get the party started. Garrett? Garrett? Can you get the door, please? If you can manage letting people in and out. Great, thank you.
Laura, I think you're probably all set. Again, at least here in the room.
All right, sounds good. Well, if we are ready to get going, I will say greetings from beautiful Bel Air, Michigan, where I am up at the Michigan Association of Conservation Districts meeting, and took a little break this afternoon to jump into our official meeting this afternoon, which is the Water Use Advisory Council. Thanks everybody for joining us both online and in person. It sounds like we probably do not have in-person quorum, but I will go ahead and at this time ask folks who are in the room to go ahead and identify themselves. And then Melissa and Jim, if you've got a handle on who we have participating online, we'll be able to get full attendance for the meeting.
Why don't we start again?
Yeah, Melissa Grassman with Jetco Solutions.
Jamil Eagle, GRMD.
Again, GRMD. Jeremiah Asher, Institute of Water Research, MSU.
Emily Fennell, Austin Great Lakes Eagle.
Brian Burrows with Travel Limited.
Doug Nato with Michigan Aggregates Association.
Joel at HDR.
Megan Napier with AKT Fairless. Sarah Pearson with Physiological Survey.
Dave Hamilton, retired from the Nature Conservancy. Rex Vaughn, MLSA. I'm here as Dave Maturin's alternate.
Ashley Eagle.
Andrew Galderos, Eagle Water Resources. Simon Julio, I'm from the Great Lakes Eagle.
Megan Cameron, Eagle. Sydney Rahala, Eagle.
Mike Dugal, Eagle.
Ken Arnett, Eagle. Neil Black, Eagle.
Travis Hoskell, Eagle. Okay, that's everybody in the room.
Can you see the list of people?
She's
online?
you're
Oops, I think I am still muted. Sorry about that. That's $5 into the kitty. Thanks everybody for going ahead and identifying yourselves. Welcome to the meeting this afternoon. Since we do not have in-person quorum, we're not going to take official approval of the minutes or official approval of today's agenda. But what I will do is, since we do still take notes and we do still let everyone know what our discussion was, even in a meeting where we don't have in-person quorum, I'm going to ask if anyone has edits that they would like to propose for the minutes from our last meeting, so that we can go ahead and get those started and start working on those. And then for our next meeting that we have in-person quorum for, we'll go ahead and do the official approval of it. So at this time, does anyone have amendments or changes that they would like to propose to the minutes from our last meeting? And if you are online, don't forget to unmute yourself, like I just forgot to unmute myself. Don't forget to unmute yourself before you're talking.
This is Frank. Can you hear me?
Yep, sure can, Frank.
Okay, because my mic wasn't working yesterday, so I just wanted to make sure. I have no changes.
Okay, thanks, Frank. All right, I don't see anybody else raising their hand, do I? Hang on. Nope, I don't see anyone else raising their hand. So again, we'll just make a note in the notes for today's meeting that we will have to do official approval of the minutes the next time we have in-person quorum. Does anyone have anything that they need to add to today's agenda? All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and again, since we don't have in-person quorum, we'll do this on a little bit of an informal basis, but we do want to make the most use of everybody's time and show appreciation for everyone who has been able to participate in it. So we'll go ahead and roll on with the agenda that we have today. At this time, we'll go ahead and take public comment. For those of you who have been playing along either in person or at home, you know that we do 2 public comment periods. The first one we like to stick to agenda items, and then the second one that we'll roll at the end of today's meeting can be about sort of any water topic or any topic of interest to the committee members. So at this time, I'll ask if there are any public comments related to agenda items.
No hands raised in the room.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see anybody online unmuting or raising their hand. So we'll go ahead and close public comments and we will jump right into sort of our official business meeting items. I think the first thing we've got here is some discussion on groundwater governance in EPA Region 5. Alyssa Fabia, are you there and able to jump in and start your presentation? All right, excellent. Well, we'll go ahead and turn things over to you.
Unfortunately, we can't hear Alyssa here in the room.
Yeah, Alyssa, I heard you respond to my question as to whether or not you were ready, but then we couldn't hear you talk after that.
Okay, I am unmuted.
She's not muted.
Can you try turning your volume up? Because I can hear you talking, but just barely.
Okay, my volume is at max.
Maybe lean really close into your computer.
Is that at all?
Oh, much better, much better.
Okay.
Can you guys
We can
hear her
hear
in
you
the
now.
room?
Okay.
Perfect. All right.
Hello, my name is Alyssa. I am online because I'm in Minnesota. I have 2 things I want to double check. One, who is running the presentation?
Jim Milne here.
Okay,
So I've got
excellent.
your groundwater governance EPA Region 5 slides up right now.
Wonderful. Then I'm just going to let you know when I want to change slides. 2, I want
Okay,
to double
thank
check how much time I have before I accidentally run your entire meeting way over time. Do you have a set time period that I need to be done by?
We didn't, I don't know if we had a hard stop, but 20,
We don't,
25
but
minutes.
yeah,
Perfect. That
yeah.
just
If
lets me
if
know.
you're over about 25-30 minutes, we'll probably start making hook noises.
That's perfect. I just want to double check and make sure I'm not going to accidentally ruin your entire agenda.
No, not at all. We're glad you
Wonderful.
were able to join us.
That's great. I just wanted to double check those two things before I started talking fully. Hello, my name's Alyssa. I live in Minnesota, so I'm going to be on your computer screen for the next 20 to 25 minutes. I work at Freshwater. We're a small environmental nonprofit. We mostly work in the urban Twin Cities area. I work mostly across the state. I will lean slightly closer to the microphone and see if that improves things. But this project worked across Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. And so I'm an anthropologist. I work mostly in social sciences with earth scientists. And so I study formal and informal power dynamics. And I'm the person we send out to talk to people because a lot of the folks who do earth scientists don't like to talk to people. And so that's why I'm here talking to you today, because shockingly, people who enjoy looking at data and graphs and maps really don't enjoy the people part of this. So is the sound still okay?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Just want to double check. Jim, if you'd like to go to the next slide, that'd be great. So I'm here to talk to you about groundwater because why groundwater? There's very, very little groundwater framework for anything. Nothing at the local level, nothing at the state level, nothing at the federal level. And groundwater is a major contributor to a lot of climate impact areas, including food and water security. It's also really hard to see that because groundwater is underground. If we can't see it, it doesn't really occur to us to think about it, but it's a huge issue. And so part of this work has been figuring out what exists and what doesn't exist. If you would go to the next slide, please. For the last 5 years, there's been a multi-partner team across EPA Region 5, so that 6-state area, trying to just figure out what we're doing, who is working on it, and whether or not there's anything adequate to even map. This has been a multi-partner project. We have been working with Harvard, the University of Minnesota, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, GLFWC, Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, multiple tribal nations across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And there's been a lot of cooperation with local governments, local watershed districts, state and federal agencies. And so there were 2 phases of this project. It's been 5 years. We've had to break it up, trying to figure out what exists, mapping out what does exist, and then trying to assess with the current framework, is it adequate? Does it support sustainable use? Does it support what we're currently doing? And looking to the future, will it support what we're planning to do? We had a report come out early 2023 with an overview of the hydrogeologic knowledge, so a lot of maps, mapping out the current institutions across that 6-state region, and mapping out what those institutions are doing. Also, a lot of the challenges. Shockingly, there are a lot of challenges, which means there are a lot of opportunities for what we can do. We also, in that second phase, which was mid-2023 onward, which we just wrapped up fairly recently, Jim was kind enough to take part, focused a lot on hands-on assessments. We had 4 workshops across those 6 states, trying to do more of a hands-on assessment. So really specifically looking at places we knew that had complex geology, complex governance issues, and a third thing, which was, did we have a tribal invitation in? If you would go to that next slide. All of this work was designed slightly differently than most of our governance work is. Most of the time, people come up with an idea, they start talking to partners, and then they ask their tribal partner, are you okay with this? Do you want to take part? This entire project started with a tribal first focus. So we interviewed 25 of our tribal partners across 3 different states. Those were the ones who responded to the invitation. We interviewed people with the tribal natural resource departments. And in phase 2, based on the issues that people had, we started our workshop approach with our tribal partners first. And so after someone at one of those resource departments said, we have this issue, we have a complex geology, we have a complex hydrogeologic issue, and we have a complex governance issue. There's a local partner, sometimes several local partners, or a complex problem, and we'd like more help to investigate what's going on. So all of this work started with a different kind of flipped script. We didn't consult the tribes asked us in to start that conversation. On a different day, I would be having a treaty talk with you. That's most of the conversations that I do and the work that I do. That is not this day. There is an executive order in Michigan. I'm assuming, given that you're a state-based organization, you know what that is. So we're going to move on. If you go to the next slide. Specifically, I'm going to talk to you about the Mishindo workshop that we did, which was in Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio. This was an aquifer that is not well mapped, and it is in 3 counties in southern Michigan, 2 in northeastern Indiana, and 4 counties in northwestern Ohio. So this was a Ohio-based company that was impacting wetlands in Indiana and waters in Michigan. And there was a USGS study that was put together with support from Michigan. And part of the issue was that the tribe in Michigan was not super thrilled with what was going on. And there was also folks in Ohio that were not super thrilled with what was going on. But part of the work that we were doing was to say, who is responsible for this issue? Who is impacted by this issue? And also, what is even happening with the water? This aquifer is not well mapped. And part of the issue with groundwater is who relies on it, who manages it, who governs it. And if you don't know what's available, how do you even start those conversations? And who gets to participate in making those decisions? And so, Jim, if you would go to the next slide, please. We started that by sticking everyone in a room for 2 days with a curated list of invitees and figuring out how to even begin mapping that out. Because part of what phase 1 discovered was there are a lot of people who are responsible, and not everyone understands how to have those conversations at all. There's a lot of management authorities, but governance is not necessarily management. And you don't always invite the right people into the room to have those conversations. And a lot of the times people are responsible, but they don't always talk to each other. And so Jim was kind enough to come all the way out to Detroit to start part of this conversation where we were mapping out who gets to be part of the conversations and figuring out where these gaps in governance exist. And so we did this for 18 months at 4 different places across 6 states to begin the initial gap finding. And if you go on to the next slide, please. One of the difficult things with groundwater is that we find many of the people rely on groundwater and aren't aware of it. This is one of the report findings from phase 1, where we have mapped out all of the different people who actually rely on groundwater for their drinking water. These numbers do fluctuate depending on kind of where populations move and who's on well water, but more or less, it's a high number, especially for this region. And it makes these conversations around who is involved and who gets to make decisions very difficult, especially because a lot of people don't necessarily know that they are relying on groundwater for their drinking water. And so with numbers this high, it actually makes it quite important that we're having this kind of discussion. And if you would go to the next slide, please. It also makes the conversation around how we're gathering and mapping data very important. I will say, I'm very sorry, I'm not a geologist. My supervisor is a geologist, and I will not read you the notes about how you need more monitoring wells necessarily, but she would like to thoroughly enforce that everyone needs more monitoring wells, specifically Michigan. but this is a geologist's opinion about how everyone needs more monitoring wells. And I will say, some of the things that you can see here about the glacial sediment thickness and the available bedrock aquifers, if you look, one of the problems that Michigan specifically faces with the geology is that it is very, very thick glacial sediment thickness, and it makes it hard to even start doing the mapping. It is one of the problems that we found with just even trying to identify the data. And then you get into the conversations with trying to, one, pay for the monitoring wells and store the data and who has access to the data. So I have a list of notes from my geologist supervisor who would like to tell you more about your geology, but as someone who is not a geologist, I will simply tell you, you need more monitoring wells, and I am passing on that note. There was more to it, but
Sarah's smiling, so you did good.
thank you. I will simply tell you that I will spare you the 3 pages I had on your geology. And you can please change the next slide. This is also one of the questions we get into with who has the right to manage water and who is responsible for it. And as someone who is not necessarily in the system, do you, a resident, know who to talk to about permitting or questions with your water? And as we saw, a lot of people rely on groundwater for their drinking water. It doesn't necessarily mean they know who to contact or how to navigate that system. It also means that a lot of us have gaps in our Great Lakes Diversion Program. That's just something we're having to deal with in real time. This is also about 18 months old right now, so it's also being updated in real time. We're all figuring out this as we go. One of the things that we have also done as part of this project team is meet with other departments, not just, I say we. This project team has met with people outside of Minnesota as part of an interstate groundwater meeting to try to figure out how to de-silo some of the work that we're doing and share information better. Some of the outcomes we have figured out is that people who are at those top levels, especially department heads or people of the state agency leads, they get together fairly regularly. A lot of the times, they're not always the people who have the up-to-date information. People who are out in the field are the ones doing a lot of that work, but they don't go to conferences. And so how do you get that like real-time information exchanged when you're not the ones going out and going to conferences all the time? And so how do we sort of de-silo some of these state agency lines? And having more of this work occur is a challenge. It's a real challenge, especially as budgets become tighter and tighter. And virtual meetings are great. We're working on it, but some of the work is just identifying that those problems exist. So if you would go to the next slide, please. As I said, one of the things that we realized in doing this work is that governance is not management. Governance is a thing that has to occur before management can actually take place. We also have realized that governance usually needs a lot of people who we wouldn't necessarily consider. And so we are having to figure out what governance means before the implementation can actually occur. And if you would go to the next slide. One of the things that we have also realized is that governance usually means a lot of resident opinions. It means a lot of stakeholder engagement. It means we need the science. It means we need a lot of the real people, because if they don't get included, that's when lawsuits occur. And all of this kind of comes together for permitting processes. And when it all synthesizes, we get governance. So It's very complicated, and we like to interchange governance and management as words, and they're not the same thing. So if you would go to the next slide. All of these are challenges. High level ones, there's no money. There is no money. We're all very sad about this. It is only going to get worse. Federal pass-through dollars are going to impact the states. The lack of state funding is going to hit the local level. We're all doing our best. The lack of money is also going to impact trained professionals. It means we're all going to have questions about how we get data, how we store data, whether or not we're going to be able to, pass on that training to people who use the data. It's a whole big vicious cycle. And yeah, at the end of the day, lawsuits. The lawsuits are the scary thing. And we're working on that by communicating better with citizens, but usually we do that with better models and presentations. So it's a work in progress. We're doing our best, and some of that is just really good science communication and getting ahead of the work that we're doing and making it less scary and more transparent. But you have to combat that up front, and it's a lot of work in building trust. If you would go to the next slide, you can skip it. You can just skip that slide. So some of these are, like, again, big impacts. We're seeing a lot of seasonal impacts. Groundwater is depleted. Some of this is we don't have enough data, but also a lot of people are scared of regulations. We also don't have a lot of regulations where we might need them. If we don't have great data around how we're managing the groundwater, or we don't have enough data to see where the irrigation impacts are or how the variability is impacting the aquifers, it's going to become a problem. We also don't necessarily know about surface water and groundwater connectivity in some places, and that's going to become an issue as well as the climate impacts increase. If you would go to the next slide, please. There's also not a lot of integrated planning in areas. There is some improvement, but especially in regional planning or at the hyperlocal scale, water, energy, and land use aren't super integrated. And it means that sometimes people will plan housing developments or large water users, and they won't think about how the grid needs to support that housing development. Or they won't think about whether or not they need water for that development. And so more and more integration between water, land, energy is going to become necessary because we're thinking about one rather than a holistic system of use. And we're also thinking in 10-year lifespans rather than 50. And we're all in the position that we're in because someone 2 generations ago made a decision, and now we're living with those decisions. So we're going to make decisions that will impact people 2 generations from now, 3 generations from now. And someone else will have to live with that as well. If you would go to the next slide. This is also becoming very critical. We are kind of it in terms of governance right now. We've got the state, we've got hyperlocal governance, and the planning decisions are here at this level. So you're making these decisions, but you're also going to have to make them in consultation with your local communities. Ideally, at the state level, it's going to be produced timely fashion, but sometimes that just doesn't happen, and it's not necessarily anyone's fault. But what does that mean for anyone else who's at a more local jurisdiction? So integrated planning and communication are key things to think about there. The next slide. Local participation is one of those things that prevents lawsuits. I'm not sure necessarily what the community engagement looks like for you, but usually what you see is that impacts happen at frontline communities at that hyperlocal scale. If decisions are made, people in the communities are going to feel it first, and they're going to raise the alarm first, and any disgruntlement is going to happen with those community members. And so if you are transparent and inclusive in that decision making, you are going to avoid lawsuits. If you are really great at community engagement and make people feel like they have a say and they're able to participate, you're probably not going to get sued. It also means that they're going to trust in the institution more. If you ask for feedback, but then don't change the process, it's probably going to contribute to lack of trust in the institution. And so it's one of those things where you have to balance how much you're able to actually include people if you're not going to do something with that input. And that's, we have processes, we have systems, and how we manage stakeholder and community engagement is important. The next slide. This just talks about inclusivity and why it matters. And if you go to the next slide as well, there's a really complicated thing that happens with industry in governance. The role of industry means that you can do really, really great planning. You can strengthen the processes, you can build trust, and there has been so much distrust among a lot of communities that have been historically impacted, that continue to be impacted. And if you don't include the industry in those planning decisions and conversations, it's just going to keep happening. And so there's also just an issue where a lot of the times there's just a different set of priorities. A lot of the folks who are sent out to site where an industry is going to be built aren't necessarily the people who are familiar with where you can build or what you should be considering, where the water availability is. The folks who are being sent out to build a large water industry aren't necessarily your geologists or hydrogeologists. And so they're looking at land prices, not is there enough water here? And so you get into this sort of conflict around whether or not the right person is in the room to make a decision, or did they think about the right information before going back to be part of the conversation. And so it becomes a very complex kind of equation in how these conversations even take place, and whether or not people are invited to take part in community and stakeholder engagement, because it's just a different sort of priority for a lot of folks. And sometimes it's outside industries who are coming into a community and they don't have to live with the consequences of the decision making. And that's just true. And so it just is hard and complex, and you have to communicate that up front to people before the conversations even start. And at the same time, if people are part of that conversation, you can build really great things because they're aware of what the concerns are. So that's the end of the conversation. I think I was within those 25 minutes. If you have any questions. Oh, one more, groundwater ordinances. Sorry, this is a zoning thing. You can do a lot with how you zone things, or think about ordinances, and it's a protective measure. Especially if you get a lot of municipalities together and consider how you are protecting your groundwater, or put together specific documents to address groundwater management concerns. You can sort of shortcut any issues, but you generally need a lot of data beforehand to put this into practice. Otherwise, you can also build this language, but this is a really good idea for city planners or city administrators. Okay, 25 minutes, I'm good.
All right, any questions for Alyssa? Yep.
Yeah, this is Dave Hamilton. I'm actually not sure where to start. There are a lot of questions, but I'll start with number one. How is this funded? Who's funding this? Are you associated with?
No, I'm sorry. I should have said that back at the beginning. This was funded by the Joyce Foundation out of Chicago. All 5 years of it was funded by the Joyce Foundation.
That actually makes sense. So you're not associated with EPA at all. You're just using Region 5 as your study area.
Yes, it's just a shorthand for why we were working in the 6-state region.
Okay, and then if you have anything tangible that you're trying to shoot for in this regional coordination or standardization, or what are you trying to do?
For the first bit, it really was just an assessment model. And in the second bit, it was mapping out challenges, barriers, gaps, and recommendations for where people could aim. So it really was just a governance assessment.
And I guess one final point that I'd like to make is that this body is actually a stakeholder body. So it's designed to try to bring together all of the interests in water. So all the various user groups, interest groups are represented on this council. And so it's an attempt to try to bring together all the voices, including tribes, at a table to talk about these water issues. So I'm not sure how that to recognize that, but I think that's an important point of what was done in Michigan, and that our regulations and our regulatory programs developed out of this group. So I think that it's something that merit a little bit of recognition on what you're trying to do, because I think it really is a good example of a way to create water policy.
Yes.
This is Jim Mill. I would like, since I was at the workshop in Southeast Michigan, first off, let me say that I really got a lot out of the workshop. I thought Freshwater did a great job organizing that. I went there really not knowing what to expect. I was the only Eagle representative there. There were at least one representative, I think some others from the state of Indiana. I don't remember if anybody from Ohio was there, but there were a lot of tribal representation, and also a lot of private citizen attending and some private citizen interest groups, mostly in the Mission-Do area. So Northern Ohio, Southeast Michigan, Northeast Indiana. So I learned a lot. I did a lot more listening than talking, fortunately for everybody else. But it was great networking, a great opportunity to hear what a lot of different perspectives who don't always participate actively in the Water Use Advisory Council or some of the other public engagement opportunities that we have. So I think going forward, we've got a lot more opportunities that we can expand upon for engagement on all levels. And that being said, Sarah can talk to you at length about the ongoing problem with Michigan, especially of the glacial geology can be rather complex and is poorly mapped and understood in 3 dimensions. MGS is doing a great job a bit at a time, but there's a long way to go. So.
Michael Frederick has his hand up.
Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. I have heartburn seeing this, a lot of heartburn. And the reason is we already have enough of a problem with local health departments trying to regulate large quantity wells illegally. And given the fact that we have 45 different jurisdictions, all ranging from varying degrees of sophistication, I'm trying to be polite here. And I believe Brandon is in the room here, Brandon Morrill. I would tread very carefully over this, having any type of an ordinance or something that we're going to purport to regulate water. I think the goals here are very noble and very worthwhile discussing, but I have a lot of heartburn given the fact that, like I said, you have 45 different jurisdictions already with varying degrees of sophistication, and not everybody understands the impact of what they do. I know that Sarah Pearson has had, when she was in Brandon's position, occasionally had to pull her hair out, dealing with local units of government trying to regulate this. And I'm sure, Laura, you probably have a few war stories as well.
A few.
Of local units of government, like, hey, you know what? We're just going to do this. In fact, the association has already sent a cease and desist letter to one particular township that decided that they were just going to pass an ordinance and to tell you that they could regulate wells. So again, I'm all for the discussion, but I have a lot of heartburn watching more people putting their hands in the till here of what's going on. So I'll just say that. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Mike. Pat, you've got your hand up?
Hi, Alyssa. Thank you very much for making the time and giving us this presentation. I appreciate it. Do you have any just quick best state that you would recommend as an example in Region 5 as somebody that's taken the lead in this area that we could look to as a shining example, if you will?
No. In part because I think what we learned was that groundwater has to be fragmented. There is no best recommended option, in part because what works for one area, water doesn't really have boundaries. There is no state that will work. The state laws are by state. And then also what works in one area just is not necessarily applicable in another, because the geology and the hydrogeology is going to make it a bad option for someone else. And so we came at this originally, we were like, groundwater governance is a thing that we can do. And we came at it and we're like, groundwater governance is not a thing anyone can do. Oh, don't do that. We can put together a series of frameworks that can be adapted for an area based on like these different kinds of things if they apply. And in this way, like a model groundwater ordinance might be a good idea, but in this case, it sounds like it's a terrible idea. And actually what you need to do is like talk more to all of these other places that are trying to do it illegally, apparently, and say, hey, actually, we need to get you all in a room and go through like what your legal frameworks actually are and maybe stop doing that. And this is a great solution in like 3 different areas of Wisconsin, because model ordinances actually work in some places. And apparently we need to take that tool away from like large portions of Michigan. So yeah, there is no shining example to look to. And actually that's what we learned, is there is no one size fits all. We can give tools and recommendations, and then everyone needs to just kind of figure out what works for them specifically.
Thanks, Alyssa. And it takes people, right? And I appreciate your approach to that part of the puzzle. So thank you.
Transparency and communication and a lot of data and figuring out how to pay for it.
Mm-hmm. Alyssa, I appreciate you talking through the process that you went through, and particularly your emphasis on sort of starting the conversation with the tribes, because I've heard a lot of, whether I'm at a Great Lakes conference or in conversations with Frank, or the great tour that we had this summer from the Gun Lake tribe, hearing about a lot of the challenges of trying to get 2 sovereign governments to, to sort of talk to each other and consider each other's needs. Was there anything that you took away from the conversations that you had in terms of better ways to engage the tribal governments more proactively and in a way that is more effective when you're looking at regulation and governance of water use?
Not necessarily related to regulation or water use, but 1, start every conversation early. 2, you may have to reschedule. 3, this is not a monolith. Like every, by state, it's probably gonna change. You may have to be going through like a consortium or committee of folks, and then every nation's going to have a different communication processes. Like you may have to go through a research committee, depending on who you're trying to contact or for what purpose. But going through each tribal council is like step one, and then figuring out who you're supposed to contact for what is probably going to vary depending on the thing. And so it's just a lot of this is just process and procedure, and it's more or less like trying to contact each state and figuring out who you're contacting for what. And so there's no like cheat sheet necessarily. But yeah, like start early. And we ended up having to reschedule one of our workshops because we just like didn't go through the proper process for contacting like 4 people. And we're like, oh, well, we're gonna have to push that 4 months. Our bad. So.
Good point. Frank, you've got your hand raised.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. About 20 years ago, the tribes and the state of Michigan passed a tribal state water accord. And this document it just recognizes that there are issues we need to talk about, both groundwater and surface water. And it also sets up a twice-a-year meeting. These meetings have been set out through a group called the Michigan Tribal Environmental Group, which includes the EPA and Eagle, as well as the tribes. And so we have a mechanism already set up with contact people who are water at the tribal level, the water folks involved in water governance and water projects are all involved in this organization. So we have a mechanism set up to communicate with the tribes here in Michigan. I'm not sure about the other states, how that all works, but I thought I'd pass this on to you, that we do have a mechanism to communicate. And that doesn't always mean that we agree, and it doesn't always mean that things work well, but it means that we have the opportunity to talk to each other on a regular basis. And the people in this meeting are not usually the elected leaders. It's usually the people, the workers on the ground, the water control people, the people that run the treatment plants and our water systems. All of these people are the ones who are involved in this. So I just thought I'd pass that on. Thank you.
Which
Any other questions for Alyssa? All right. Seeing none, and I'm hoping folks can help me out with making sure if you point out if anybody's got their hand up in the room, because I'm only able to see little sections of the room at a time. Thank you for being willing to present to us and provide your information for us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate your time. Have a great rest of your meeting.
All right, thank you. Okay, I think we are now ready to move on to Eagle's program update. I think we're going to hear from Lena and Adam, and then from Jim. But then do we also have a budget update that we were able to squeeze in there?
We do. I'd like to introduce our senior deputy, Travis Bosco, to come up and join us. He is our senior deputy over all things finance and administration, those kind of things. And you'll remember that we talked earlier in the year about the frustration that council recommendations are somewhat out of sync with state budget process and the opportunity. And, you know, some were asking, why isn't the state advocating for the same things that we are? And I think there's some inherent timing issues, but anyway, we had invited Travis the last meeting, but it was tough to put together. Travis, thanks for joining us today. And we had just hoped maybe to have this discussion with Travis, not solve everything, but he can speak a little bit to our process, and then also maybe how we can create better synergies of advocacy.
Adam. So some familiar faces around the room and on the phone, but for everybody, I'm Travis Bosco. Adam introduced my current role. So I've got pretty much the whole administrative side of the agency under my purview. So budget and finance, our outreach team and our environmental support division, and then our information management. So things like public information, IT development, GIS, that type of stuff. I also, most of my time with the agency, I worked in our legislative office, so I got to work on the bill that recreated this body back in 2018, so kind of fun some things like that come full circle. So, yeah, thanks for the introduction, Adam. Talking with Adam, it just seemed like it'd be helpful to talk. I'm just like a little peek behind the curtain of how the budget development process works on the executive side and kind of what that means for like a body like this when you're making recommendations, you're making budget recommendations. I think I've done this recently. I did it with some of our environmental stakeholders, and I just think it can be really helpful. So I'm going to use the FY27 budget, right? That's the one we're working on right now as the example, just because it helps to, I think, ground in reality, right? So FY27 budget starts 10/1 of 2026 and it runs through 9/30 of 2027. So we are 10 months out from that budget starting. What most people see for the first time about the FY27 budget will be when the governor, or in a lot of cases recently, the state budget director, Jen Flood, they present the governor's executive budget recommendation at the end of January, start of February every year. That's about when it happens. But what most people don't know is that process of putting that budget together started months before that budget ever showed up. It's all delighted. So what I will say, we submit to state budget office, who kind of organizes this whole process into the governor's office. Details of what we submit there, those are considered confidential within the administration. So you're not going to hear me talk about a lot of detail about what we asked for, what we didn't ask for, what we're planning to ask for, what got said no, what got said yes when we asked for it. Not going to go into that. And then the other thing that's confidential I won't go into is negotiations, how we get to things, right? I'm not going to be the one that breaks that confidentiality with my House and Senate budget chairs. We have productive conversations, we have good relationships, and I'm not going to break that confidentiality of how we got to those decisions. But I can still talk about process. So when do we start this year, right? When do we start working on the budget? Usually you'll hear the finance folks in our agency talk about, we usually have 3 budgets open at once near the end of a fiscal year, right? So towards the end of FY25, right, which just ended on 9/30, we were still working in FY25. We were getting ready to launch FY26, and we were already developing FY27. So within Eagle, what we do is usually around August of every year, we pull in leadership from all across the agency. Adam and his peers, essentially, the division directors, our office leads, myself and the other deputies, the director, our chief of staff, that group. And we have a very, very long meeting offsite where we take budget petitions from the divisions. So, you know, previewing a little bit of where I'm going to go near the end of this. If Adam, for instance, doesn't know what the need is for FY27 for the next cycle by August of 2025, so again, we're 14 months out from the budget starting, he can't pitch that as to raise up within our process. So we hear, you know, I would say that this year we probably heard 40 different proposals from our division directors within the agency. We typically have a deadline to submit our budget proposals to the state budget office and to the governor's office of sometime in mid-October. And what that means in terms of what we submit, how much we can submit, varies really widely from year to year, right? So there may be some years where we can only submit 3 or 5 individual proposals that can't all be lumped together. There's some years where it's a little more unlimited, although obviously we want to do some internal prioritization. But again, just making sure you understand the context that any kind of budget ask exists within. And again, we're still just talking within the right now. We're not talking about the entire state budget. So we take those proposals that our division directors and our office leads put together in August, and then within the executive office. So again, me, director, the other deputies, we start to whittle those down. And again, the priorities are competing at that point. So think about investments in our regulatory staff? Are there any programs that we feel like we need to beef up inspections or enforcement? Or, when we're talking with the legislature and with stakeholders, they want to see improvements in our permitting timeline. So, to be honest, the way you do that is show that process improvement. So when you put more people in those programs and you give them a couple years to get the ground running, or a couple years to get up to speed, not hit the ground running, you can't in those programs. We do see really demonstrable improvements in our permitting timeline. So that's always sounding good to stakeholders and legislators, right? Other areas that we're looking at competing, we also have all these programs that have this kind of combination of funding streams of federal dollars, general fund dollars, and state restricted dollars. Well, federal dollars are going down right now, and they have been for years, especially in some programs. There's some programs that are based on how much you dispose of waste. Well, those are going down too. So we also have to look at where do we have inadequate revenue that we need to either propose more revenue or ask the legislature to for some general fund to kind of plug that hole and make sure we're keeping that same level of service. We're also looking at grant programs and pass-through dollars, right? We know we've got every community in the state has to replace every single level service line in the state. That's because Eagle did rulemaking that said you had to do that. So there's some responsibility there. We know we have water infrastructure issues. And then also, and that's probably where this group fits in, we have program investments that we have to make that aren't people and aren't necessarily exactly passed through grant dollars to communities, but how do we do our job better, right? How do we make sure we understand what we're regulating well, make sure we're making the right decisions, have the data that we need to do our job. So that's a big group of priorities we start to work through. Those go over again, like mid-October. So there's usually some conversation back and forth within the administration, us, state budget office, DOG. Usually, decisions for the executive budget recommendation, in my experience, which again is limited in this role for the past few years, those decisions aren't made until early January, mid-January, maybe a week or two before the governor presents that budget recommendation. And then this is the other thing I want to make really clear to folks. The second the governor presents the budget recommendation, my job changes drastically. My job becomes advocate for what the governor proposed. Legislative liaison's job becomes advocate for what the governor proposed. Now that doesn't mean we don't take meetings, we don't listen to ideas that stakeholders are doing. We don't have conversations about, well, that could be helpful or that could be. But I have a very defined job from February 1 until in a typical year at the end of June. It's year less than a typical year. We all know that. But I got to advocate for what the governor proposed. Usually once we get to negotiations with our House and Senate chairs, there's a little bit of space. But sometimes we have specific instructions on the administration side of like, these are the things that it's your role to advocate for. So again, if something's not in the governor's budget recommendation for the first 4 months of the year, I'm not going to be going to my budget chair and saying, hey, you should fund this, right? Because it's in direct competition with what the governor proposed should be funded. But again, that doesn't mean I can't have a conversation and say, yeah, it's a pretty good idea. We can appreciate some investment in that space. Tom, I prefer to what the governor proposed, but some conversations. So, what does that mean for like a group like this, right? So if you're all, and I can't remember the cadence of the annual reports for the advisory. Is it annual or is it every 2 years? Every 2 years. So the last one was 2024. You'll have another one in 2026. Okay. So for instance, it's possible, again, I'm not going to get into details, but it's possible we could have considered, if Adam raised things up, we could have considered the 2024 recommendations in this current budget development cycle for 2027. But since those 2024 recommendations didn't come out until December of 2024, we had already submitted all the people's asks 2 months before those recommendations ever came out. So I think it's important for a body like this to understand in an even year, when you do your recommendations, you're going to see a year plus time delay before Eagle can ever ask for those funds, for instance. And that's only, again, being frank, that's only if it rises above our other priorities And then B, it makes it through a filter in the state budget office, and C, it lands on the governor's recommendation. Because there's a whole heck of a lot of competing priorities there, and the governor likes to base their proposal on how much revenue is available, whether it's one time or ongoing, whatever.
And Travis, so, I mean, it seems to me the best that like this body can do as you think about maybe moving recommendations up from December to like June or July, earlier in the year, not waiting for the report to be completely full. Even when that is, you understand that you're getting on the radar for a full year later. You know what I mean? Like you would not likely have recommendations acted on in that next fiscal year. Sort of the best you're working on is the following.
Second, yeah, maybe focus is down. I get all that. Thank you. I appreciate that. It was a really good overview. And we suspected the delays and the time mismatches for sure. I actually think back to like when we recreated this council, that part of that, the impetus was recognition that as an Eagle advisory body, that any recommendations that this whole stakeholder community put forward would be forced into competition and priority with everything that the department needed to ask for. I know those numbers can change, but you know, I've often heard like I would get 3 requests, proposals for change. And I think we knew after 9 or 10 years of that not ever individually occurring, that was a systematic flaw. Very not fair. I think all of us recognize that the department is a giant department, state of Michigan, with a ton of priorities to meet. So I think big part of this was that we should set that out, and this is a community of a ton of affected people in the state of Michigan saying, here's what this program needs to meet our requirements and expectations. So with all that sort of said, I think what we're really looking for is to figure out how we can get assistance, not necessarily putting it within your system, but how we might get help raising hand or flag with the right person. It sounds like the budget director is a great start to say, hey, there was this report from 2024, didn't match up for inclusion in 25. It's that one's written. I know you're not going to help them, but you know, there's no way to get 26 report immediately in it. But it's that sort of saying, it's not Eagles. It's not ours. We're not going to use one of our tokens if we have any at all. It's really to say the statute says this body's reporting to the House, the Senate, and the governor's office for a program within Eagle. And you shouldn't have to use, my personal opinion, be careful, you shouldn't have to use one of your department chips on that. But we've been struggling, to be very honest, when we deliver the report, even the second, third time, of getting like, oh, here's every major stakeholder body on water in the state of Michigan agreeing to something that used to really just matter. I know politics is different. But I think that's what we're more focused towards right now is, you know, so if it's for the next budget and that's coming out, whatever that may be, it's getting that hand raised, perhaps in the governor's budget, to say there is a 2-year-old report ready to rock. It got overlooked. I will say, you know, the last thing I'll add is like, we've had 2-year delays. We're used to that. The last time around, thanks to Dave Maturin and a lot of other people that contributed, it was not in the governor's budget, it was not in the House, it was not in the Senate, and somehow we got a consensus from all 3 parties in conference committee. That was miraculous and not to be expected, and we don't want to depend upon that again. And so I think that's sort of, if we start without a mention of it in the governor's budget, as you described, it's an uphill battle. You talk with the House or Senate, but well, the governor's not even doing it for an executive program. Why should we? So I think it's really think our focus request has been how can we deliver and get that attention for it. Again, I don't think any of us, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we're even stating like anytime we ever say we need this, that shall rise above all other state priorities and everybody's figuring, we just don't want it left out of the discussion.
So if I'm a stakeholder, just a generic stakeholder who wants something funded in the state budget, and I think like, you know, the nice thing about this body is there's a stakeholder that appeals to every legislator on this body, right? So you can figure out who needs to talk to who, right? Like you might have a different one of you talk to my budget chair, Jeff Irwin, in the Senate versus my budget chair, Cam Cabot. Because just different folks hear different things. But if I'm a stakeholder, I have several targets when it comes to budget throughout the year, right? So leading up to August, I'm talking to the department. After August, I'm talking to whether that's the governor's office, someone directly there, like a policy person, or the legislative team, talking to them to advocate, or I'm going straight to the state budget office, right? I'm showing you where kind of the pressure points are in this process and the decision points. Then once January comes around, regardless of whether or not what I was hoping would show up in the state budget, and in this case, in Eagle's budget and the state budget, when January rolls around, regardless of whether or not that's in there, then I'm turning to the budget chairs in the House and Senate, Ken for Eagle, Jeff Irwin in the Senate, Cam Cabot in the House. Maybe I'm also talking to their vice chairs as well, right? Because a stakeholder coming in and pushing something is one thing. A member on the committee that's willing to say, you know what, I feel a lot better about this budget if this is in here, that helps too. So I think it's you gotta hit every one of those steps along the way to keep that noise and to keep it in people's head, because there are, especially in today's budget environment, which, you know, I had this in the Q&A, budgets are getting really tight, folks. I mean, I don't know how many people looked at our budget, some of the budget's been running right, but we saw reductions in this year, both in people and ongoing FTEs and how much one-time funding we have. But sorry, where I was going with that is there's a lot that we disagree on in this budget environment right now, like where I want to spend money was different than where the Senate wants to spend money and the House wants to spend money. But you know, when there's smaller dollar things, which again, like in Eagle's budget, which is historically in the past few years been almost $1 billion, the recommendations of this committee are in that $10 million or less range. That's fairly small dollar amounts. It's things that there's a lot of bipartisan agreement on, right? Whether you're the agriculture community or the conservation community or whomever, there's a lot of space for agreement there. So if you keep those things in the heads of all three principal groups that are sitting at that table come June, it really advantageous.
Perhaps are there other legislative bodies like this group that make these types of biennial recommendations to the legislature and funding asks? That I'd be curious to look to those to see what process are they using and where they're serving as advisory to the state program.
Off the top of my head, I can only think of things that have Eagle involvement. So I think of like the so like WAMC and TAMC and MIC, which are the Water Asset Management Council, Transportation Asset Management Council, and Infrastructure Council. I don't know that they make kind of direct funding suggestions, though. I don't have anything off the top of my head. I can look.
It's been like a gotcha question, but I was just curious if what else exists in state government and the legislature that's like this body. Because I'm not aware of many other groups, and it's set up in that way for us to speak directly to the legislature and make recommendations and funding asks. So
I'll also just say, like, the delivery of an annual or biannual report is not adequate to get the legislature's attention. Like, I look at and I review and I sign every report that we submit to the legislature. Every single one of those comes across my desk. There are a lot. And I spend a lot of time providing information to the legislature about things that were submitted in a report of some kind, right? Because that's not like throwing shade. It's just, it's a tremendous amount of information. There's 20 some agencies and we're all submitting 100+ reports. I just think we have to get in front of those folks and say, this is why this is important. This is why this is important.
Is it reasonable for this body to try and get on a committee agenda then to come as a companion to the delivery of the report to?
You can do it that way, although I'm more of like that strike while the iron's hot type guy, right? So there's a regular cadence in the late winter, spring of every year where appropriations committees are meeting. And, you know, a lot of times at Eagle, I'm filling up that agenda, whether it's with department overviews or budget priorities that we presented. I wouldn't mind a break of someone else coming in and presenting on their budget ideas. And I think like chairs want to meet, right? So if you go into the chair and say, hey, we'd love to present on these recommendations, of bipartisan group, bring a couple of people. And I know we did that with this council, probably 2022, right? Something like that. So I think that's a pretty good opportunity.
Also thinking too, just, you know, we have this long biennial report, but, and we also usually have like an executive summary, but a 2-page fact sheet would be really good. What are the top line priorities? What are the specific funding needs? What are we really trying to do? I also think that, you know, just annual appropriations for operation of the program, like the regular, that should just be part of Eagle's budget. And I think one of the things we've been doing in the biennial report is also asking for like ongoing funding for, and that feels like that fits within the budget presentation is, but it should be part of just our basic operations, just like any other program that we have. It's not necessarily, may not necessarily be an increase, it's just ongoing funding.
Yeah, Emily, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I had a lot of trouble hearing you. Can you repeat what you were just saying?
Two things. One, I was suggesting that we create like I think we already have an executive summary, but like a 2-page fact sheet from the biennial report that really highlights the priorities and, you know, what are the funding needs. So it's really concise and digestible. And then the second one was just that the annual appropriation, you know, for the operations administration of the water use program should be part of Eagle's budget. And that shouldn't have to be something that every year or every other year we're asking for funding, because it's generally stable plus cost of living increase. So, and that fits well within, you know, hold up for changes or, you know, the budget presentation that Adam would give at our annual meeting. But it's like we have kind of like two different things that we lump together in the biennial report. It's like ongoing things to administer the program to make sure we have the data science tools needed, and then we have projects and research that we're supporting to help improve our understanding of our groundwater resources, support the science and learning, innovation.
One of our concerns is we don't want to get raw space with the government over the department. I mean, I think we view you as allies and we're kind of trying to get this thing kind of big done. But what I hear you saying is that since we are creating this independent entity, that we can use it as a way to go to the legislature directly. You wouldn't take offense, you don't take offense, because you know, it might not have come up as your priority, but you would recognize it as a valid priority in the mayor's discussion. Is that it?
Yeah, and like, I'm not gonna send Adam with you when you do that, right? But
Well, we
I to be honest, I love when things that maybe we had to say no to internally come out of the legislature as an idea. That's a great thing for the work that we have to do. So yeah, I fully encourage it. And I don't think I don't know many people in the administration that it would feel across in the stakeholders advocating for their priority. Like, we all get how this process works, you know, at my priorities here, figure it out. So I think.
Thanks. Well, I think we're still evolving and struggling with these. There's some nuance in a couple of them. You know, a couple, when Emily talked about like ongoing needs, that's a struggle that we kicked around. It's kind of complex to make sure we're not stepping on toes, because doing a biannual report is not the way to sustain annual operations for the budget, right? And so you should ask, but then you have to ask as part of the Eagle pyramid of prioritization planning. So what if a year or two goes by where the internal process doesn't go, you start having a stronger opinion of stakeholders about it going, even if it's annual operations and not like a one time. So I suspect we're gonna muddle with that for some time. We have a biannual report. So when we muster a bunch of advocacy to get it included in a budget, and the next year it's stripped out because we're on a 2-year cycle, it'd be a lot easier if it was annual and there's like, hey, do they have something this year again? And something's in there as a template when we started. It's easier. So we struggle with that. And then I think for a lot of people here, we're all different as stakeholders in our abilities, willingness, or just, abilities to advocate. But it becomes confusing because we're all either appointed by a Senate majority leader, a Speaker of the House, or a governor called by statute to make these recommendations. And I know we're feeling like sending a report out 2 or 3 times to all the entities listed in the statute is become ineffective outreach for the recommendations we're asked to give. But then crossing into like, hey, here's how you do full-blown advocacy for a stakeholder funding request. A lot of us are used to doing that process, and it's not exactly the same as what we're appointed to do. But I think we're struggling to figure out how to discharge our statutory responsibilities effectively in a system that's working a little different than 5 years ago.
A couple other things. I started to get towards this, but just like awareness. When I say we're in a big budget scenario, I really mean that. When I wake up at night, I'm not thinking about how to spend money. I'm thinking about what happens if we have less money to spend. And I think that's a potential reality. There's less revenue, and there's some other departments that have a lot more money they have to spend due to federal changes, right? And those are not options. Like, they have to spend that money, and so that's got to come from somewhere, and revenue is less. The other thing I wanted to throw out there, this is a new thing right now, but there's a lot of conversation over the legislature right now, today, even, about work projects, right? So when we get money appropriated in a fiscal year budget, we have that fiscal year to either spend that money or put that money into a contract or a grant agreement to obligate it, right? Well, something like a series of recommendations from the Water Use Advisory Council, it could be that like there's an editor process there, right? We might need to go out and get some data and then make some decisions based on that and enter into a contract or sink some wells, so we'll put in some stream pages or whatever to the next year. And there's definitely a sentiment in the legislature at the moment that if departments don't spend that money within a year, that money should just go back. We try to be judicious with where we use work projects, some things that should be work projected. So it's just another like one of these nuances that could be easy to overlook. Oh, we got the money, great. And then money here, right? After 6 months, 8 months, whatever. Just wanted to flag that. Further questions still too?
There are no questions online.
Any other questions in the room? All right, Travis, thanks for the update. Appreciate your time.
Yep. Thank you, Trav.
All right, I think we've got Lena and Adam up next. Going to talk about updates to the Watt tool.
I think Lena's going to take the lead on this update for you.
It's an 80-day update for how the new water withdrawal assessment tool is going. About 80 days ago, we had used some code that was published over the summer by the USGS, and we hired a contractor, Stafford Gray, to build essentially a wrapper around that code, and then presented it to, we turned that into the public facing interface for water withdrawal registrations. You can see the metrics for how things have been going so far since we released the new tool. There's been 41 registrations and 35 SSR requests, 10 of which are pending, which I think gives us a total of 66 new registrations that have been processed through the new water withdrawal assessment tool. Oh, Jim, you have to hit the next slide. Sorry. And through that process, we identified that there was a difference, right? That was work done by Hannah and Megan as they continued to work with the Stafford Gray team, development team on the next phase of work that will be finished in January, February of next year. But they identified that there were differences between the new code and then also the old code. And you can see a summary, and I apologize for the very coding based type of data presentation you're seeing there, but those are essentially screenshots from Stafford Gray's development module where he compared the legacy code. So that's the legacy ERFC column to the legacy script or to a couple of different simulations, right? So we were trying to test and evaluate what the possible differences were. One of the things we were looking at was a library called SciPy, which was introducing a series of rounding differences. And then also the new implementation of the code. So you can kind of see that there's the legacy ERFC, that's the existing Watt or the previous Watt, the legacy SciPy, right? We added in a library just to kind of evaluate whether or not that was a potential impact to the code predictions. And then you can see in the final column a new implementation that was the PyCap and then Stafford Gray wrapper type of predictions for the Watt. And you can see the two different results there. So one of them is a set of data showing the intermittent pumping results, and then the other one is a continuous pumping results data set. So I'm actually going to stop there and see if you guys have questions on what I'm actually presenting, because Adam is giving me this look. And I feel like I'm seeing also the same looks from other people here. So
those numbers, correct me if I'm wrong here, Lena, but those numbers are gallon per minute stream flow depletion predictions by the old code and the new code. So if you compare the center column to the right-hand column in each of the slides and look at the magnitude of the difference before, and next slide we'll get into.
So what they saw was generally over predicting depletion over the previous solution, previous code.
Question, that the third column always has bigger numbers, right? Basically.
yeah, that's right. Or on occasion,
So
right?
over predicting depletion.
It was over predicting depletion. Yeah, that's right.
But the first two are identical.
The agreement of the two columns.
Yes, so that's actually because that's the old code, right? Like
So cold with new code.
with a new library inside of it. I'm sorry, this is a lot of really technical. Yeah, kind of. So it's actually the old code compared to the old code with a different library in there, which was used for calculation.
Right.
Right,
So
like-
it's updating. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Because it's both are based off of the old Watt code. So. Okay. Okay.
So that's the old version.
Yeah.
And now,
So we worked with Howard and with over at the USGS and Stafford Gray, and they identified that there had been a conversion factor that actually had been missed. So essentially, they forgot to convert something from metric to feet. And so as a result, the distances, the differences in the distances propagated it. And once we fix that, the predictions are
Hubble telescope
back.
there.
Yes, yeah, we landed. It didn't crash. It just kind of faltered a little.
Conversion between.
The
That's
Mars
right.
lander jokes just write themselves. It's
So now it looks like the differences are fine down to usually the 100th decimal, but
That's right.
there's some tenths in there.
Well, and we're accounting at the whole GPM, so we're not accounting for any of those decimal places. In conversations with Stafford Gray, they identified that that's likely because of the time interval that's used in the estimation, right? Like the new code is assuming 365 days, whereas the old one, I think, was using 365.25 to actually account for leap year days. So, yeah, I know. But the math matters, right? So, but that's why you're seeing some decimal places that are a little different there.
Dumb question, if you're ending up with basically the same results that were all this work, what did you solve by doing them?
Well, so for the last 80 days, we were running a code that was over predicting in some instances, and then we've identified why that was doing that, and we fixed it. So this is just an update to let you know.
Sort of a slot for. It's like we just.
When your cell phone, you can't receive the next operating system.
Yes,
You have to get a new phone. That's basically what
it
happened.
was a bug, and we pushed a fix. So to the coding.
What's the trigger to find the six?
To find the fix or to find the issue?
Find the issue.
The water use assessment unit team identified it, and the system owners. So that would be Megan and Hannah.
Somebody's had a, oh my God.
Well, I think there was concerns, and that was actually the point of having the summary. There were concerns that this could potentially push water management areas into a zone D classification, which would ultimately mean that there would be no additional water available if we were over predicting the impacts of depletion.
So we were potentially coming to have that conversation. USGS wasn't available, feds obviously for a little while. The teams continued to work with them and comparing things. Yeah, like, so the USGS code was fine, but as I understand it was dimensionless. And there was this little piece, which is actually a hot fix of like single line code, I think, that is going live tomorrow to repair this. So the production environment will correct this issue. So we needed time to sort through that. The first couple things that it might have been in terms of differences weren't, and then they were able to find the exact reason why the code was over predicting.
The issue is with the wrapper part that Stafford Gray had developed, right? When Adam says that the pi cap is dimensionless, that's correct. But then when we're working in the wrapper that Stafford Gray had developed, that isn't dimensionless because we have to do distance calculations. And so then that's kind of where they found that. So the USGS is off the hook for having to republish. So.
Looking at the data chart, and I don't know if it's the time to do it, but vast majority, at least on the right hand figure, seem to be like really identical or super minimal. The left hand box, I'm looking at 15503 and maybe like the 21550. Those are the ones that seem to jump out to be a bit different, 16.8 versus 17.6. But really, it's that first one where it went from 6.95 to 8. Those are the only ones that seem at a percentage to be significantly still different. The rest of them are kind of hundredths. Is there any idea of why just like that one or two count still came out?
Kind of wonky, a little different. Well, I guess, so the reason why you see the SciPy analysis there is a difference that's occurring as a result of the different Python library that is being used. It has a greater degree of refinement. So essentially, instead of, I don't remember exactly, instead of like 8 decimal places, it can carry it out to 16. And so then in some instances, it actually propagates that further refinement into variable responses. Right. Well, I mean, if you're looking at the differences, you know, if you're imagining you have like 8.65, right? Like imagine if you then took out that 0.5 eventually, or 0.15, eventually that would propagate into something significant, right? Like as opposed to if you had like 0.6.
So you suspect it's just a quirk of that individual one where it had probably a larger number of rounding
Yeah. Or
errors that were rounding to the.
yeah, that was one of the things that we were evaluating, or like I said, they have a slightly different day calculation, right? So like if we added in the 0.25 into the time calculation, then that would actually make a small difference as well. So, I mean, there's a couple of different things as the software had to evolve, right? Like if we're thinking about some of the tools that went into building the old Y, you're talking about 2008 internet technology. And so then there's been things that have kind of modified since then.
I suggest you look at those today, right? This is a really good question. Because most of them, I mean, there is no difference at all. With those, it is no so 10% difference. And so the question in my mind becomes, is it because say there's a different company scheme that's being, you don't have one of their board, maybe it is propagated differently, but at least I know that what that's because it's doing instead of 3 months, it's going to 6 months, and it's doing something very different. And is it mathematically correct?
Yeah.
What's being done now? I want that assurance.
Yeah, well, we're continuing to work with Stafford Gray, obviously, and then also the USGS. So as we continue to have additional updates, we'll be able to share that both with the council or the models committee if, you know, everybody feels the desire to kind of dig in a little bit more detail. So we can talk about things like Python libraries and rounding error propagation.
And there was no decisions that were made during this quarter, this time period, that would have been reversed or need to be reversed or anything as a result of this.
Yeah, that's right. And we're going to rerun all of those 66 registrations so that then we can kind of fix the accounting that occurred during that 80-day window. Right, well, that was all for me. Oh,
that's like,
I guess there's one more slide I forgot. Sorry, everybody. So I guess kind of going forward, what we wanted to do, besides just rerun the registrations, is we want to put into place annual maintenance, right? I mean, we've had some discrepancies that had come up before with some of the other tools that we would have been using. And then just kind of seeing where we're at relative to this new tool and just kind of ensuring that it continues to perform as expected. What we want to make sure that we're doing is annually performing a maintenance check on it. So we're going to run the code that had been built into PyCap just to kind of verify that the code that we're using is still aligned with the expectations that have been published for the USGS. And that'll happen if, you know, the USGS decides to push some sort of update to PyCap on their end. We'll rerun that set of evaluations just to kind of make sure things are still aligned. And then we'll also run it through our own tool. So the Stafford Gray wrapper that we identified that issue with this time, we'll rerun those same set of estimation methods so that we can kind of just make sure that things are still working as we expect them to. We'll include that in the annual update to the council.
Thanks, Lena. Appreciate that update. I guess it does raise the question, is there a mechanism to be able to, in addition to looking at comparisons in maintenance between the new system and the previous system, knowing that the Auditor General's report had highlighted a couple of discrepancies in terms of, you know, online versus batch tool data that was coming out as well. Is there a need that you see or an opportunity to take a look back in time at where some of those stream flow depletions ended up and whether or not there's anything that needs to be updated or corrected in that? And I ask because of kind of this ongoing conversation we've had about watersheds that are either approaching or already at having zero water availability left. Just wondering where we are with that and whether or not we need to do some thinking about ways to make sure that we're doing doing our due diligence about calculating water availability in those water management areas.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. That kind of leads into how we're going to be looking at some of those water management areas that are implicated by the system accounting to be in Zone D, right? I mean, there can be discrepancies between the way the tool is predicting water availability versus what people end up actually seeing on the ground. And so really the first step when we're going to be looking at those internally is reevaluating the current water balance. And then that would include kind of reevaluating the existing registrations to see that's some of the first steps that Jim and his group take is to see if there's additional water that can be made available without causing an adverse resource impact in the water management area that we're looking at. So, getting the compliance portion in line and getting our accounting in line really is step one in trying to identify how we're going to handle the water management area, water balance availability going forward.
On people coming back and discussing with us before any changes are made retroactively.
Sure.
Just from a policy perspective, full disclosure, conservationist, whenever we talk about a fundamental technical upgrade, we talk about not retroactively changing any past ones that may have a consequence by doing that. So selectively, retroactively redoing ones to accept lowered withdrawal estimates. It's a bit of a policy concern. Consistency.
I don't know that that's what we would be looking. I think where we want to go and swing to, and we've heard this. How do you handle these priority areas that have come to a state where there's no predicted water availability without an ARI? Those are the areas that we want to work with the team to do more work to confirm everything that's been done, not to rush to add water by tinkering, not to remove people's registration, but those water conflicts and that no, we don't have any water for you is going to necessitate looking at those. I mean, you're starting with conservative screening tools. You're applying some additional science through SSR process. It's going to necessitate deeper dives, water user committees, and deeper dives into confirming what we know about that water management area.
I see that coupled directly to data collection efforts, right? I mean, that's kind of the piece that's going to give us the best picture on what we're actually seeing in the field. You don't.
Always fundamentally been challenged in that the fundamental tenets is prediction, following a prescription. And so dive into trying to then use empirical, any data sample program is what you can sample in the field isn't necessarily a truer pictures and based on what you have for resources to collect.
I mean, I hear what you're saying. I just also, when I say field data collection, I don't mean a single measurement. I think more of kind of creating an understanding of the population, right? In terms of the type of flow data that we would actually see in the field, and then coupling that alongside some of those procedural methodologies that are currently in place.
Yeah, I think a combination is good. I just for the data committee, that's just been an impossible number, right? So you don't have empirical baseline, you have a prediction. You think you have a predicted problem, so you start collecting empirical, thinking that you can somehow see a problem when you don't have the empirical baseline is a challenge that we're going to start with. Like what data standard for empirical proves it to us when we face them predictions. what that makes. Because
Do you think that we're on the right track though, in that that's gonna be a future reality in some of these areas where we are gonna have to look to deploy some real sampling, temporary or otherwise, to complement, I mean, to fill data gaps, to make decisions, explore things like monitoring, conditional approvals. I mean, it's going to be a number of things in the toolbox, and we've got to figure out what reality is in those watersheds when we get to that point. And it seems like
That's what is the reality? So there's not enough data collection. I hope she better define reality. It's not better models and have to interpret that data. And then how do we manage this reality? What are the implications of various levels? So it's going to be a combination of data collection and modeling. It's going to do it. And I mean, I agree with Brian's concern that you can't just put it in the and say, oh, or let's do it. Oh, that does not give you the answer. It's not adequate, not possible. It's a combination of modeling and other understanding of that.
Brian, I'm not really sure I fully understand your question in terms of what the water use staff are currently doing. So day in, day out, behind the scenes, what we are doing, some of the things that we are actively doing routinely is compliance evaluations, looking at comparing registration, what was registered, and the water use reporting, and trying to, when there are differences, true that up. But also, we are in the process of, over the winter, basically, essentially, we're going to be strategizing. Okay, we've got a number of water management areas that on paper, the stream flow depletion balance is in the negative zone D. So prioritizing some of those and developing strategies for, okay, how are we going to collect additional data in those water management areas, recognizing that it's going to be a multi-phased effort, probably part of which is probably going to be including collecting stream flow measurements from the headwaters all the way down to the mouth in a depleted water management area, but also looking at stream bed conductance from the headwaters down to the mouth, for example, and then constructing conceptual hydrogeologic models using the existing information. So given that, are there other things that you think we should be doing that we're not doing or not planning on doing? I'm kind of unclear on what your concern is.
sampling is sufficient to sort of have a question like what's the rule? So an example. So maybe this will help. Maybe there's a stream that the predicted base flow was, let's say 200. And our county system is debited up to 20%. Now, we're at the less. You go out and you might sample and go, hey, it's at 190. Don't actually know what it was measured at. We just know the predicted index flow. It could have been at 250 to start if you had measured it empirically. So it's a little bit of a mismatch later on to go out and be like, hey, you know, the tool says that we have a problem that's reduced it by 20% of the index flow. We're now trying to measure index flow in a year, 2-year period, which isn't also perfectly equated with a 30-year mean, which we've dealt with. And you measure it later on, you go, oh, well, it only looks like it's 15% down. Can you actually say from that it didn't decrease it to 20%, 25%? Can you say it decreased to 15? Don't have the starting at the pyramid.
Yeah, and
so
part of the
sort of a way
yeah.
that we're gonna have to. I'm just saying that before we do that, there are some fundamental mismatches with predictions, and then come in and try and solve it with empirical that didn't have empirical baseline. I think we just gotta be careful talking those out and saying, what's the right weight of evidence that everybody can go, yeah.
And I think that my mouse may be interested in looking at this question with you. Because there's a lot of interest in how the board's going to answer this question. And we'd like to make sure that it's scientifically valid and that there's good agreement on that the approaches make sense, that there can be policy issues as well. We think we're going to have to wade into. So I guess what I offer is that we'd like to work with you. I mean, I think you've got to do, a lot of upfront work that you can bring to us that we can walk through. Because it's going to be some of the education. But some of it, it's like even setting up some of the conceptual approaches that you're planning on. If you could talk through some of those too. Some of it, if we just kind of say, hey, it's index over that, that's asking the wrong question. It's not that simple a question because we're looking at not this being not from a particular point and express the potential whole. And to know whether that's happening or not, just by measurement, is incredibly different. Which is why you need a combination of the modeling and data.
Yeah. Okay.
Who's modeling the computation? What does that mean? What you're seeing?
So what I would anticipate, I think that what you guys are saying fits in pretty well with what I was envisioning. The overall scheme is that we'll have a better plan, a better product if we, over the off season here, we're developing our strategy for, okay, how are we going to approach these depleted water management areas? Take that back to the models and data collection committees, get your guys' input, adapt, make modifications as necessary. Come field season, we're out there collecting the data. And periodically, we're reporting back to the committees and maybe the full council progress updates, and then figure out, okay, now what, where we stand.
Yeah, I gave like 200, and the county system says we've used about 20%. We're out 60. We could also go out and find that it's well, no, the open group, but we also don't know what they started out at 100 CFS and 200. It can go either direction, and I don't know. And on the spot, I don't know how to sort that out. Like, I don't know what the answer is. Just collecting empirical. So that's when my fear is like, let's just figure that out together. Like, what's the right way to do it?
Do you have a concern with how index flow reviews are done?
Personally, not on a technical level. But if you're asking me, I'll be candid. I'll say that I'm not sure how many times during index flow reviews or even in like a site specific review. Over the years, I don't know how many times, like a very standard approach when, and if the increase that made the situation worse for the registrant, it was actually shifted that direction versus looking to find one or two, the first couple justifiable techniques to get the extra water to improve it on. That's a question for you guys. I haven't tried, but I feel like there's a lot of pressure to not decline something. And I worry sometimes about systematic procedures and if it's beneficial, if it's adverse, whatever that procedure is it applied or do we sort of have a tendency of trying to seek registrations to solve one lane more often? That's not an accusation, I just work.
Right. Well, we've got, as a practical matter, as we think through SSRs or other approvals, we've got a statute that says, once you're beyond the screening tool or a registration into SSR that you use actual flow data. So we have original baseline indexes, which, listening to your words, you're cautioning us that moving away from that needs to be handled in a very responsible way. We do the index flow reviews, so there's like, actual data that informs. You have index flow updates that are sort of analogous from another water management area, and then you have the original baseline index flows. And
so I mean, you're touching on a very complicated index solution. What have to develop. But fundamentally, index flow is a statistical representation of the history, period history, stream flow. So ultimately, you've got to tie back into a history stream flow. And there's some ways to do that. The concern I think Brian's getting at is if you're just looking at this stormwater management period, the question is, has the flow changed? You don't know what that means. Flow has changed. But what does that mean? You can't know that, one, without taking some measurements, two, tying it into some long-term gauges elsewhere, and doing some modeling or other analysis to try to figure out what it means. So, when we periodically look at index flow, we try to look at it. Have there been systematic changes across the state that we need to make and recommended payment as to what those numbers actually are? We've made them. We have not made any. But we have changed a lot to change. What's the definition of the index flow? And nobody's questioning that. The question is, has it calculated it today different now than what it was when calculated years ago? So, my goodness. At some point we're going to have to we're going to have to deal with that question of legislation were fixed a certain period of time. And we're getting further and further away from that period of time. We have to figure out what do we do with that. I think personally, either the next 5 year period or the one after that is where we're going to have to say we really need to look at this systematically, make some decisions, and we have to make recommendations back to the legislature. But that's still down the road.
No, I agree. I feel like this could be tabled, but
Todd Beanstra does have his hand up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Todd, I'll let you go in a second. We sort of tabled it in the data committee when the first round of discussions about the Prairie River came up. We had these very things like, well, how much empirical data collections in 3 years, because that's kind of a minimum. But then Todd was one of the first ones that showed us some of his data where you can have an abnormal tendency for 3 years in a row. And we sort of said, okay, like the DNR indulged saying, we're probably going to pay this consultant to collect more data than maybe be deemed sufficient normally so that we can all take a look at it and finish the discussion through, like, you're going to be using empirical, like what is enough? How would you structure it? We tabled it because probably this winter we'll maybe get the results of that and be able to kind of force that discussion forward. But we tabled it too. They're hard. Just trying to, it was still an evil when I started measuring base flow, trying to compare, and I'm not sure, even 3 years, that I've figured out the right way to put that in fair relation to a long-term history index flow yet. I still have like 75 sites where I think the index flow is different than the empirical base flow, but I don't know how to do the fair sorting of it. But he was still working it when we started. So I just wanted to signal, we'll table, but like signal it's complicated, but we have to solve it. We're gonna have to solve it. It won't be perfect solution. Sorry. Todd.
Thank you. If we're talking about using empirical data to test index flow or verify it in stressed watersheds, and we're not sure whether that works or not, maybe an out of the box or simplest solution is to find watersheds that aren't stressed and collect the same empirical data in those watersheds and use that as your blank or your test to see how well empirical data matches up with index flows. Then we're removing the complicating factor of pumping and stress in those watersheds. There's several thousand watersheds. Certainly we can find a couple of them that aren't under stress to do some of that work as a baseline, at least, if nothing else, just to test the methodology. And it's, to me, I look at the index flow argument as, the index flows a regression analysis that was checked against, I believe, 147 stream gauges. Well, there's several thousand watersheds. We're kind of the horse is kind of out of the barn already at this point. If we're like, hey, our empirical data is showing that the index flow is off, but the index flow was right before, and maybe, the stress has already happened. That's kind of a no-win argument because you're trying to prove a negative, or another theory. as well. So maybe the easier way is to build into the testing program, testing some unstressed watersheds, just to validate the current method of trying to verify the index flow.
I think Todd's touching on the one point that should be considered as part of the evaluation.
I agree. And I just read the report a decade ago. We did that. We took a lot of watersheds, mostly that were not heavily stressed whatsoever. And the complication is that it's a bell-shaped curve compared to the index flow. You did a good job. It's not incredibly skewed or biased, but we found, 20% that were under predicted more than 40%, 20% that were over predicted. So I don't think there was a great skew at all, but it will be tricky. Like if you get a problem watershed, jump out there. I don't know whether measuring it, you're going to find one that was really tight originally, or whether you were on one side or the other.
But I think one important point is we're actually way beyond that regression, because the reason that language is in the statute is to say, let's look at what we have here. So it's not going back to the regression. So that but information that we have to come up with the best index for us to situation. So the department's doing that. So it's abandoned the regression. It's come up with another way of calculating it. And should I move forward from that? There's still a question though, can there be changes in the index flow? And that's a much bigger picture question than I with. But I think on the individual site, I think the department has come up with reevaluating. That's what will come up. It's what it is. It's independent of the regression. It's based on other data. That's
It suckered me in and I wasn't sharing this section, so I'm sorry. Sorry, Laura.
That's okay. It's helpful because I've noticed that being remote, I am struggling a little bit to hear the details of what everybody's talking about. So please jump in.
You probably see what's better than you.
Okay,
Do we
well,
have any more? I was just going to ask, do we have any more that we need to cover in terms of this topic before we let Jim take over with the unit update?
All right.
Okay.
Hearing nothing, I'm going to try to blow through the units part fairly quickly to leave as much time as possible for some of the committee reports, because we've got some rather lengthy slides yet to cover. Okay, so quickly, going to be updating the calendar year 2025 year-to-date metrics through roughly December 1st. And lastly, I'm going to update you on the most recent GRMD personnel note. So metrics from January through December 1st. We had 232 tool auto pass registrations, a total of 154 SSR registrations broken down, 16 zone A, 33 zone B, 63 zone C, 15 that were still pending, i.e. we haven't reached the decision point as of December 1st. We got a slug of new SSRs in the last few weeks with post-harvest. This is the busy season for ag to propose new withdrawals for next coming year. 12 that were authorized as replacement of existing baseline capacity, 15 retracted by applicant, and then another 40 SSRs that were beyond the 10 business day deadline. And there's a table in the bottom corner breaking that total down. So the categories, as previously discussed in council meetings, were first what we call administrative, and then desktop reviews, and then the final category would be technical reviews. So in the administrative category, we had 8 that took between 11 and 30 days to complete, none that were over 30 days, so a total of 8 administrative SSRs that were beyond the 10-day. In the desktop category, 31 were done between 11 and 30 days. 1 took over 30 days, so a total of 32. So the totals, 11 to 30 days, 39, over 30 days, 1, for a total of that accounts for the total of the 40 late. Moving on. For visual fans, pie chart of total SSRs received and determinations made. So 124 were authorized. We have 15 that were retracted by applicants and 15 that were still pending as of December 1st. Timeliness. So again, the statutory deadline is 10 business days. Our average number of days of business from receipt to the SSR determination was 10.2, and 66% were completed within that 10 business day. Top graph is the average number of business days from receipt to the SSR determination from the start of the program in 2009 through 2025. And the bottom graph is the percentage of those SSRs that were done within 10 business days from 2009 up to 2025. So currently, the average, as I said in the previous slide, was slightly over 10 business days and 66% were done within the 10 business day deadline. So other program metrics, Part 327 permits, so a newer increased withdrawal over 2 MGD or 1 MGD in a zone C or over 100,000 for intrabasin transfer. We had 4 requests, 3 of which were issued. 1 is currently still under review. Our compliance efforts, 58 compliance communications were sent out during that period, which was broken down into 42 revised registrations. So that is when LQW was installed and or operated differently than what was registered either by the tool or an SSR. If there was enough stream flow to authorize the as built, as operated, we issue a revised registration. Another 14 communications sent out to verify installation of the LQW. And then another 2 that were after the fact, meaning that withdrawal wasn't previously registered, but there was enough stream flow to authorize after the fact. The right-hand column there, the pre-screening reviews that we do for Eagle Drinking Water Division, essentially doing a site-specific review for a newer increased community water supply. So in that year-to-date, January to December, 30 total, broken down as 13 Zone A, 5 Zone B, 3 Zone C, 2 Zone D, 4 geology pass, meaning that the pump dock we concluded was not hydraulically connected to surface water. 1 was authorized as a baseline replacement. And as of December 1st, we still had another 6 that were still pending. Finally, our most recent hire, I'd like to introduce Ashley Reibel, sitting in the back there next to Garrett, between Garrett and, yeah. Welcome, Ashley. And that's all I've got. So now we're on to Great Lakes Compact Council updates.
Yeah, Emily, whenever you're ready.
Dave's got it. Especially the administrative, getting the time out and reporting. The percentage going to the SSR is high, but it's not as high as what I think it could have been. So I think that's something that we're going to have to work. That's kind of what we're trying to do with the down the road recommendations with that. You know, the special education framework and other things that
I don't understand your comment, Dave. Like the percentage that are going to SSRs is controlled by whether or not they're able to use the screening tool for the registration.
Right. So the higher that gets, I think, still drag. So that's my main concern. So was working on is trying to reduce that drag. The recommendations that we put on and the Michigan Meteorological Framework is going to facilitate what does in those SSRs, or come up with other ways to go have to go into an SSR. But it's actually at 30%. It started at 20%, and we use it as where we start. So it's grown from 20% to 30%. They could go higher, and actually, I'm surprised it hasn't gone higher. And interesting thing, why that might not happen. People may just sit and say if I get an L1, the 2 on me's not going to bother me from this. I'm sorry, I don't know. Because there are a lot of areas that get close to the ARI or internet, so they're automatically go to necessary. So I just want to point out that it's at about a third right now. Originally, it was at about 1/5, 20%. So it's been going up, which is not unexpected. And I'm just trying to point that we are doing things that we think.
That would still be considered an SSR, but we're working on tools.
Metamodeling. That which not that can become a substitute. Which we have new information, which should make it more accurate and maybe avoid some SSRs. So that's something we're looking at. We may be looking at as network stuff.
All right, Laura, I can go ahead and just give a quick update on the Compact Council regional body.
Great, thanks.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'll use my theater voice. I know it's hard when you're on the computers versus in the room. So we added at the last Water Use Advisory Council meeting a standing agenda item just for me as the governor's designated the Compact Council and the regional body, just to update this council on any items that might be of interest, and also just kind of to help connect the state's stakeholder advisory council on our water use program to the work that's happening at the regional level that implement the Great Lakes Compact and agreement. So I don't have any slides today. We may not have things to share at these meetings, but did want to update on a couple of things this week. One, we have 2 meetings a year with the council and the regional body, and the second meeting is coming up later this week on December 11th, and that'll be held virtually. We have an in-person meeting every June, and that rotates around the Great Lakes Basin in the state or province. So we have a meeting on Thursday, December 11th. There's actually a couple of official meetings that are happening. We have a meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning with tribes, First Nations, and Métis. And then we have a second meeting at 11 o'clock with our regional observers to the Compact Council and the regional body. So those are kind of 2 separate times where we can have conversation about projects that the Compact Council and the regional body are moving forward on. And then in the afternoon at 2 o'clock, we start with the regional body meeting. And these are open to the public for the afternoon meetings. And each of the jurisdictions provides an update on their water use program activities since the last meeting held in June. And then we do submit those in writing as part of the formal record. So just a couple of things that I'll be sharing at this week's meeting, and noteworthy to this group. We have a couple of requirements under the compact and the agreement. One of them is to put together an annual water conservation efficiency program assessment. So that helps us highlight a lot of the great work that we've been doing with this council and the Water Conservation Efficiency Committee. So we gather that information across the agency programs. We also share a draft with the Water Conservation Efficiency Committee for them to take a look at, and then that's submitted to the Compact Council and regional body. So that's one of our requirements. We also have the 5-year program review that we brought to this council last year. So at this week's meeting, we will be formally adopting a declaration of findings, which is basically a statement that says, based on all of our collective review of the 5-year program review submitted by the states and provinces that each of the jurisdictions is in compliance with the compact and the agreement. So that Michigan's 5-year draft report we developed back in 2024. We all had a chance to review it. And also we held some consultation with tribes, and then it was available for public review through the Compact Council and the regional body. So at this point, we're considering those final, and then we'll be passing this declaration of findings. And then we have just normal business, adopting our budget and passing some resolutions for that business. We also have a number of projects that we're starting as a council, one looking at future-proofing the Great Lakes Compact. We have a project that we are going to be doing some interviews of people who were involved in the original compact and agreement negotiations, just recognizing we have a lot of turnover that's happening in the region with new governors and premiers coming in and with staff retiring who've been in these roles for a long time. And so there's an effort to help sort of capture that institutional knowledge and create a curriculum that can help the next people who are stepping into those roles. So I'm really excited about that. Joyce Foundation, some of the other Great Lakes funders are helping to support that work. We have another set of projects where the council and the regional body over the last several meetings have been hearing presentations on some research to help us better understand future water demand and forecasting water use trends across the Great Lakes region. So I'll work with the tri-chairs and the program, and we'll start to see if there's some specific presentations that we want to bring to this group and invite those researchers so this group can benefit from that knowledge. We have shared all of the recordings from the presentations that have been given to the Compact Council regional body, but I don't know if you all get as much from that. It's nice to have the opportunity to have some dialogue and discussion. So, something else I want to mention. I think the last thing, Simon gave an update on a large quantity withdrawal increase that was submitted to each of the parties to the compact and the agreement. Onondaga, I want to say Ontonagon. Onondaga, New York. We received a prior notice as required by the Great Lakes Compact for any large quantity withdrawal increase or new increase that has a 5 million gallon per day rating and consumptive use. So we worked with the program. We did review that. It's not subject to regional review and decision making, but it is subject to regional notice. So we did have a few comments that were submitted to New York. We met with a few council members here to talk more about that. If you want to have more conversation about it, just for the sake of time, we can set up a separate time. But mainly, we review that against the decision-making standards and the agreement and the compact, and provided some comments to New York on additional areas of information that we felt would be helpful for them to gather and request from the applicants and better understand the nature of the proposal. But based on our sort of general review, it looks like it meets the decision-making standards. So I think that's it. I think that's all I had.
So a quick question. Have you heard, is there a compact science advisory team meeting coming up sometime next month? Yeah, you can touch base with me offline.
So it's also, I think this group is aware, but Jim has been participating and me and myself and the science team. So the Compact Council, we should buy in a science team. We have a 5-year science strategy. So we're continuing to work on implementing that. We also have the 5-year water conservation efficiency goals that are done. So there's some periodic activities that we do as a regional body and then reaching into our state provincial programs to make sure that we're connecting all this work. So it's been really beneficial. I think we're seeing some great synergies and information and knowledge sharing across some of the state, especially some work that we'll talk about here soon as part of our committee report. So that's all I have. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
Any questions for Emily? All right. Well, thanks, Emily. Appreciate that update, and to Lena and Jim and Adam, thank you guys for providing Eagles update as well. I'll turn the meeting chairing over to Brian Burrows at this time.
Thanks. And we'll turn it back to Emily.
My turn. The talking stick. Let's see, so, Timothy can pull up our slide. So we just had a committee meeting. We're still meeting, first Thursday of each month, every other month right now. We are spending some time continuing to move forward, a lot of progress on our existing recommendations. And the one thing I'll start with first, we are already thinking about 2026 recommendations and how to approach those. We would like to have an in-person workshopping session with the committee. And certainly any other council members are welcome to participate in that. We're looking to host that the morning of the February 10th WUAC meeting, somewhere here in Lansing, so that WUAC will be here in Lansing. And we want to take a look at the Alliance for Water Efficiency recommendations. We're going to be creating kind of a wireframe and distillation of the recommendations and findings from that document that can help the committee then sort of workshop what we might want to put forward as recommendations for this next annual report and kind of lay out the next body of work. I think we felt there was a tremendous amount of work that was done through that project and interesting findings, things that already reinforced some ideas that we've had. And we want to also bring our knowledge and experience from the projects that we've been working on, the MSU extension and others over the last couple of years. Really have a chance to come together, sit around the table and talk about what's the body of work that we want to drive forward in the next 5 years. So we are planning that. We've got a small planning committee that'll be meeting in January. We're hoping to have it somewhere on site and maybe at the MSU Federal Credit Union, a community meeting building, and then we'll come over to this building and slog through another 3 hours. So we'll be looking a little cross-eyed by the end of that day. We are planning to continue with our virtual committee meetings in 2026. If you're interested in joining the committee, reach out to me or Kelly Turner, and we can kind of fill you in with the schedule. It's generally going to be monthly. There's a couple months that we will skip just because of Kelly's and my availability and travel. Let's see what else do we have. Next slide, thanks. So we had a couple updates at our last committee meeting on the Ag Water Conservation Efficiency Educator Project. Their presentations and a number of meetings, and we have a scheduled meetings from Janine at MSU Extension that we can share with the WUAC. So you can see some of those upcoming opportunities. I don't have the numbers in front of you, but significant impact in terms of the participants in those groups and seeing a lot of value from that increase in capacity. Work is underway for the irrigation pilot project and mobile lab. There have been some initial meetings held with the project team in November, and then the EGLE is in the process of reviewing the quality assurance plan with WAC. And then we had Sarah give us an update on West Michigan's water study that she's working on that really dovetails into some of the work that we're trying to do with the Compact Council regional body scale of really understanding water use trends and water demand and water availability and looking at a bigger picture scale, help us develop some information that's useful for communities and for people to understand water availability in their area. So Sarah's going to give us more detail on what that project is that you got to come from the funding. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, so I'm going to give a high level of what the project is. It slides in on time, so but I am going to pop in the chat the inspiration for this project, which is the Central Ohio Regional Water Study, and that's going to give you some perspective to of what we're thinking about doing. We want to mimic what they have in mind, they've done. So the goal of the project is West Michigan the Regional Water Study is what we propose because of the very reasons that we've heard today when we were listening to Alyssa and even some of the other discussions that we've had is that groundwater in Michigan is very complex thanks to our glacial history. And the glaciers really did a number on Michigan. And so understanding where our water resources are and what's available, it's not uniform across the state as we know. and we're facing these challenges. And so Lena came to me and she had seen the presentation on Central Ohio's regional water study. And we know that the geology dictates where the groundwater is. And, we've done a lot of mapping on the west side of the state, and we know that we have some water challenges when we have Ottawa County and Allegheny County taking the lead and looking at that. We've been looking at them and collecting a lot more information and data as far as what's available there, because they want to do a source water protection program for the whole county, which is really commendable. And so what this project is focusing on, it says west side of the state, where we've been doing our work is Muskegon, Canterbury, Kalamazoo, Van Buren, Ottawa. Just because we have a lot of information and we've been doing some drilling and getting a better idea of the 3D glacial thickness and what the geology looks like in these areas. And so the goal is to assess current and future water needs, groundwater and surface water, so that communities, it's the families who are really struggling with identifying areas to allocate for different purposes, and even as the aggregate's fine. It's the same thing we heard about from Melissa, are you going to build out a recharge area? What's that going to do? And so the outcome is a data-driven foundation. So we're compiling a lot of the data, we're compiling the geology, as well as looking at a lot of different sources, as Emily has up there on the slide. The infrastructure, so we're looking at the land use and population. And this dashboard that we'll be developing will give you an opportunity to kind of play with scenarios. So a land use planner would be able to use this tool to look and predict what population growth might be in 2050. Or, is it the same? Is it status quo? Is population increasing? What is the demand? Data centers are really, I guess one of the things that is really causing us to really think about this hard. We needed this way beyond yesterday, but we're making the effort and working with Lena and the team to develop this tool. And so it's important so that we can develop some resilient water systems for the next 25 years. We're also looking at wastewater and where that's discharging. Is it discharging back to its source, or is it discharging out to the Great Lakes? So those are all of the areas that we're looking at, land use, and going to develop this dashboard. So right now, we kick this project off in October. And so we're in the data collection phase. And as far as what data can you collect, what data does it make sense to collect? This isn't going to be a tool that you can use or a land use planner can use for a particular spot in a parcel of land. It's not that specific. It's more of a screening tool, kind of like the WAC. It's a screening tool. But it's different from the WAC in that it pulls a lot of other different data and can be used by different parties. So we're collecting data, and Pat has been gracious enough to help us out with Ottawa County, and we've been going back and forth. He showed us what data they have available, what data he thinks the stakeholders would have available. So we're kind of testing that out so that when we do go and ask the broader community in the 7 counties for data and information, that we can be specific and give them as precise of an ask and try not to be super burdensome on what the ask is, so that we make sure that we get the data back. And so we've been working with them, and we're broadening that to some of the other folks in Ottawa County, and next week with them. So essentially, it's access to a tool where we can start looking at water use, what maybe a water budget is, and making better decisions about where we're citing particular resource demands are. Last week when I gave the update, Frank even asked about energy. That was an interesting concept as far as energy demand in these areas as well. And so been thinking about that idea. We'll see where that goes. But they'll be working with a contractor as well to help us out with the modeling. And Dr. Khaled Omar is my hydrogeologist on staff, but it's just the two of us, and this is a much bigger project than the two of us can handle with all of the other balls in the air. So, you know, that's coming up too. Well, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Thanks, Sarah. So this project that Sarah's working on now is really addressing that concept that the committee brought forward to the MOVAC last year, looking at what's the future look like for water use and water availability in the state at a much bigger scale, and how do we better understand overlaying all the existing data that Sarah just mentioned to help us better manage and understand and make decisions with regard to the resource. So not a regulatory tool, but a planning tool. And as we were working on this concept with the committee and U of M's, some of the U of M's faculty last year to try to do a project, it then emerged there's a tremendous amount of interest Great Lakes wide. And so the Great Lakes Compact Council, the regional body, are now working in this space, looking at funding some regional studies in an initial phase. And so we're partnering with them to make sure that we can incorporate and share data that Michigan has available through this West Michigan study, build off Ohio's work. And I think seeing Ohio's approach really helped us see a way to operationalize this and make this very applicable to. So more to come, but thank you, Sarah. I'm excited to see this project move forward.
Yeah, I think that can actually kind of get back to that conversation we were just having relative to the index flows and kind of future casting, because that's ultimately what the point of this project was to kind of look at scenario forecasting for different, different facets that could change in the future relative to population growth, economic development, and then water use availabilities.
And the other project, there is another project underway that's through the Great Lakes Commission, another regional governance organization that's funded by the Joyce Foundation. And they're looking at, they created a kind of GIS dashboard right now, prototyping that's focused around agricultural changes and trends and commodity and production. And so that's just starting to get underway, but that project will be folded into the regional work and also connected in that series. So just trying to make sure all these dots are connected. We're not duplicating in many dots.
Any questions? Online or?
And online.
I would just make one quick brief for now, that related both to your last one and this one. It's just, you made me think water conservation and efficiency. We have a new sector that is proliferating incredibly quickly with really large volumes, and I'm not sure where we may be at as far as conservation and efficiency standards or practices, or even how to start a discussion with the sector that may not be around discussion. And so I would just raise it as whether it's your work here or on the Compact Council. I'm sure that's on people's mind, but it seems like that's a great way to start talking.
So both places, water conservation is definitely something that we're talking about more regionally and how do we advance that more. But in the committee, we are having conversations about, is that something one of the board's recommendations, certainly be part of the workshopping discussion, but that is an area that we don't have voluntary best management practices for because of tech industry that exists in that fashion back in 08. So, is there a proactive way that we could work with that sector? We've gotten some indications that there's interest there. So we tried to do some outreach with, aquaculture before. That didn't manifest into something very small industry, but I think there's some opportunity with technology and water industries that we don't really have. Centermine's working on it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm gonna pause. I'm realizing that probably the last and really significant agenda item is probably the models committee. So you like to go next so that we do not shortchange you?
Thank you. Our main topic today is talk about Michigan hydrologic thing update. Before I start, I just want to make one quick advertisement. So the 3D glacial mapping and the transitional probability work is basically done. And so we're going to have a models committee meeting soon to go over that and start to go recommendation with the council. So Katie's be sending out a doodle poll to send that meeting. So watch for that. Otherwise, I'm going to turn over to Jeremiah to hydrologic homework.
All right, I'll try to keep this relatively quick because I know Howard and Bob have some other parts to add to this. Who has the slides?
Let's check.
Oh,
Right.
this one's Bob's. Can you
Skips forward to yours.
Yeah, so I'll since last time we presented and gave an update, I'll give just a brief review, just because I know not everybody here saw that presentation. If you go ahead and go forward. So we're working on the Michigan Hydrologic Framework. This is a platform for sharing and visualizing groundwater models in Michigan and for helping to gather data and build new models. So this is a joint effort between MSU and USGS and the state of Michigan. IWR at MSU is doing the overall management of this. And then MSU RSGIS is doing the integrated water management database. And then USGS is developing the models and helping to inform us and give us some guidance on the model integration into the Michigan Hydrologic Framework. You can go ahead and go forward. Last time I just kind of showed conceptually how the system was going to work and connect to each other. Go ahead and move forward. We provided a few mock-ups of what the screenshots would look like. You go ahead and move forward. And so now we've actually started to put these all into creation. This will be the landing page, or is the landing page for the Michigan Hydrologic Framework. There's a series of menu items across the top for searching data and models, and I'll walk through each one of those interfaces. They're all functional at the moment and working. We are integrating additional data sets and the model pieces, which Howard and Bob will talk about a little bit, but we have the system functioning and working, so we'll just continue to expand some pieces out. You can go to the next slide. I'll walk through each one of these interfaces a little bit. This search data interface is where a user can interact with the system to access data for building a new model. We provided two primary mechanisms, and I'm sorry, I have some animations in here if you just click. One is to draw an area of interest for accessing data. And by doing that, it'll provide an open window for you to interact with the system. And here I drew there's a box there showing a bounding area. Go to the next one. Alternatively, you can search by watershed. And there's three options that will be provided up on the screen, one for HUC 8, HUC 12, and then the water withdrawal management areas as another layer. You can select multiple watersheds, and that's what we did in this case here. Go to the next slide. And then on the left-hand side, within that bounding area that you selected, so if you did watersheds, it lists thematically different groups of data, and then you can select in there. So this one is geology. Here we've selected the glacial landscapes. You can select multiple data layers, however many you'd like, and then you can click on the download data, and that will open an interface, download that to your local desktop. Go to the next slide. This just shows you being able to take that data that was downloaded and interact with it locally on your machine. Go to the next. Our next interface here is searching for models. So in that case, we were searching for various data to build models. Now we can look at models that have already been uploaded into the system. And we have, I think, 5 models that we've uploaded so far. The user can interact with this system by working through the interface and navigating geographically across the state, clicking on one of those. You go to the next slide. That'll open up a menu item, which gives 2 additional pieces of information. Go ahead and click. You can either get that model detail and more, or provide that information about that model in more detail, and then download that full data set. It'll extract all the data and files that are associated with that. Or you can visualize a model. Click next there. Which is the other option. I'm going to go through two of those real quickly here. You can click next. This is the interface. If you want to get more details about the model, it'll share information about model name, external links, other information about the author. And then you can download that if you're interested. If you click on the next one, the other one is to visualize a file. So this gives you the ability in a 3D environment to interact with some of the portions of the model to just kind of get a better sense of what it is before you proceed to move forward. You click next. I just have a small animation here just showing what the user, different things that the user can do with that system. So they can change various aspects of the model. They can exaggerate some of the surfaces, move their way through the model interface here. They can also orient themselves or the model on the landscape. So if they go over here, just like this, they can change the view and aspects of the model. You can go ahead and click next. So that's available for any of those models. You can interact with that 3D portion. And then the last feature I'll go over here is uploading a model. So if you've developed a model and you want to provide that as a model that's accessible through the system, you can upload that into the Michigan Hydrologic Framework. You provide the details that are asked for in the front interface here, and then upload that. But next. The system will then go through and verify the completeness of the model, just making sure all the components and files and data structures are there. Not going to tell you whether the model is, valid or correct, but it'll just show that it's complete, and it'll go up to the state for further review before it becomes a live model on the system. Go ahead, next. And this is just a quick summary of where we were. I used this slide in our last presentation. The things that we've added checkboxes here to are things that we've done since our last meeting. So we've integrated the ModFlow models from USGS. We've developed the services to connect the integrated water management data system and download functions within the interface. We've started doing testing, stress testing in particular, on how the system would work with various size models and downloading data. We'll be continue to interact with DTMB on some of those results, and then we'll be moving into some of our external testing, and then taking the test results for that, making modifications to the system. So that's kind of an ongoing process. Sharing with Water Use Advisory Council, we'll be continuing to do that as we move along through the system, and we'll have some live demos coming up as we probably with our next one. And then we'll just be moving into documentation and transferring this over to DTMB long-term for folks to wrap up. And with that, I'll pause if there's any questions.
Do you want me to go back to Bob's slides now, or just forge ahead?
Yeah, why don't either one? Howard is, why don't we do Howard's and then we'll do Bob's. And I'll mention too, some of the interfaces that I showed, or whatever's easiest. If you have Bob's up there, you can do that one. But some of the interfaces here that I showed are actually a combination of work that we're doing with RSGIS. So we're developing some front end pieces, particularly for the data extraction, and our RSGIS is developing some of the back end. So a lot of the work that we're showing here is us integrating those two systems together.
I don't know that I've got any slides from Howard, just from Bob and you. So,
all right, you want me to take go now? Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. So I just have a few slides here, and by the way, I just want to make a mention of the interface and everything that IWR's put together for Hydrologic Frameworks. That's all them, and that's amazing. I think it's just really cool how they've developed that front end to the web tool that we're developing the back end for. So they've set us up to succeed really well there. For the web tool, and I covered this at the last advisory committee meeting a little bit, but really what we want to do is we want to have a simple way to gather multiple GIS data sets. For this, it's about having data sets that contribute to hydrologic modeling or other water-based modeling activities. But this goes beyond that as well. We can use this. In fact, when this is done, I think I'll probably use it on a regular basis for projects. Because a lot of this data is just spread all over the place, and it's a nice way to get that data quickly. The tool, as it's being built right now, is within ArcGIS Pro that we share as a service out to ArcGIS Server. That's what sort of the framework of the MHF is being built upon. And so the tool, as you saw with the screen grabs that Jeremiah showed, that's available in the web application through that custom interface that they built. So the goal here is to select specific desired data sets, retrieve that data from hopefully as much as we can from existing web services, so we don't have to actually store that data ourselves. Specify a specific extent by user, whether that's a watershed or a polygon they draw. And then let the tool run, which is a select or a clip and a projection out to the projection of the user's choice. You can go to the next slide. So this just kind of shows us there's multiple selection and clipping avenues. This is all backend stuff, so the user doesn't see this happening so much except when they're drawing the actual polygon. So you're using that user interface, but drawing an AOI on a map in the web application, that's one way. It's possible now, and it's functioning, to upload a user-defined polygon shapefile. You zip that shapefile up and submit it to ArcGIS, submit it through the system. It goes to ArcGIS Server. It unzips it and it completes the process, the clipping and the projecting. Or we have several canned extents, such as the WWAT catchments, the different HUC watershed versions, and then we're going to add counties as well. The output formats for the vector data, we're still working on the raster data, but for the vector data, we're looking at CSV files, which is a pretty generic file type, table file type, shapefile, well-known, and also a JSON file format, which is pretty common out there too. And understanding that modeling occurs, when modeling occurs for a certain area, you want to have data beyond the extent of what you care about, so doesn't get squirrely around the edges. There's an integrated buffer involved that allows that to extract the area a little bit more than your area you need. You can go to the next slide. So the web tool is evolving. We're adjusting the output format and information. We had a meeting recently to discuss that a little bit. So as the data is captured by the user, that the file names represent what that data set is, and includes metadata so they know what the heck they're using. And there's a couple different ways we plan on doing that. The buffer distance choice was something that was brought up as well. Depending on what you want to do, you may want, a 100-foot buffer of your user. You might want a kilometer buffer. It depends on what you're doing. Right now it's hard coded, but we're going to make that a choice in the UI. And then coordinate system choice too. It'll default to WGS84, sort of standard coordinate system, but there are desires to have that kick out to, such as Michigan GeoRef, or when the new datums come into place here in the next year or so, new NatRef datums, that we can maybe kick it out to that new state plane coordinate system that's going to be available. We're working on the ideal formats for raster data sets, but typically those are going to be your TIFFs, maybe your ASCIIs, different things. And then really what we need to do is we need to add all the relevant data set paths to the tool. So right now we just have a couple, 2-3 data sets in there for testing purposes, make sure everything's working fine. And we're going to start adding all those other data sets in there. We were in communication with USGS, with Howard and Brent to make sure we're getting the data sets that are needed. There's obviously UI tweaks going on the IWR side. And then there is one other thing that we're doing, and that's creating desktop client add-in versions for ArcGIS Pro and QGIS. That's sort of taken a back seat to the ArcGIS Server implementation, because the ArcGIS Server implementation is priority #1 for this tool. And then we talked the other day about building a tool for DEM extraction. The DEM data is a little different. It's large, and we're talking about the LiDAR-derived DEM data that is high resolution. So you can imagine how big it could be if you're downloading a county. It could be 10 tens or hundreds of gigabytes of data. So there's a separate tool we're envisioning for that. So that's pretty much the gist of what we're working on. There's a lot to work on, especially after the last meeting we had, a lot of things that were identified. So that's a good thing, but things are trending in the right direction. I think that's my last slide.
Yeah. So
Okay. Yeah. Any questions?
there, no? Okay, well then I'm going to try to access Howard's slides. Lena emailed me. So bear with me.
Just mostly what we're doing now in these periodic meetings. So whenever we have some significant updates, we'll share that with the advisory council.
And we do have a work group that goes with them. So if you want to be on work week, you have more for them. So we do try to address things clear on the base of the council. So
You can grab those little 6 dots. You see those 6 dots? You can move that dashboard thing. Should be able to grab it and move it. Is it not working? There you go.
Can I ask while you guys are getting that set up, just quick question regarding the hydrologic framework, and I apologize if you guys said it and I just couldn't hear it. When you've got the models that are getting uploaded, what kind of review or check or or other process is going on to make sure that what's going into the framework has been validated as working, is doing what it's supposed to be doing?
So I think there's 2 parts to that. Well, one that will be on the state side and one that's on the system side. So obviously we can't do that. We can't do that sort of a review on the system side, so that we are essentially just looking to make sure all the pieces are there for a complete model, so that when it does get up to the state, they have something they can work through. So that's all kind of our system checks do. And then
For the review that happens on the state side, essentially it's going to be up to the creator of the model whether or not they want to make it publicly available. The interface will be able to accept models from any consultant, really. But then it'll be up to the author essentially to decide whether or not they want to make it publicly available. And right now, those are just ones that have gone through a published review process. So the models that you were seeing were ones, correct me if I'm wrong, Howard, but I believe from the USGS directly.
Yeah, I think those were all published model archives, so they were available to anyone. And
okay,
Glenn was able to just bring that model archive down and post it up.
Okay, thanks.
You're okay, Howard. You can roll.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'll talk about 2 of the USGS deliverables under the hydrologic framework, the model in center and meta modeling. So we'll go to the next slide. One of the use cases for the model Michigan Hydrologic Framework is to have an uploaded model that the users can then do a subset to make a smaller model out of, inherit the boundary conditions from that larger regional model, and have a set of model runs that they could use. So in the yellow box there, you see the MHF will have the parent model files, output files from that large model, and then the user will put in some configuration for how this inset looks. We do a process using a package called ModFlow Setup, and we deliver a set of inset model inputs. We were thinking kind of the first case is maybe the group there in Eagle, where there's a large model that Eagle is working with, and maybe a bunch of site-specific reviews they need to carve out of the model. And then as we talked about this, we wanted to say, well, that facility should be transparent, and so anyone using a model should be able to do that. So that's how it got into the MHF. So next slide. So the mechanics of it look pretty straightforward. There's a configuration file that's there with the black background and the colored writing, and that describes the model that you're working with. And you can see there it says we're going to set up and then we're going to remake the top. And so what's going to have to happen is at the state level, at Eagle, they'll decide, here's a regional model, we want to make it available for insetting. And then the analysts there will prepare this kind of configuration file. And the configuration file will specify, like, where do we get the information from the model top? Where do we get the information for the hydraulic conductivity? Where do I get the information for the stream network? We can't inherit the stream network from a large regional model because it will be too coarse. So we want to have a shapefile of the stream network that we can intersect with and draw the streams. So we'll go to the next slide. So we'll just kind of walk through that process. This is the Tri-County model that Michigan State used for one of their test cases. So if the user comes in, specifies an area of interest box in the same way that Bob just showed, and says, okay, well, the original parent model has a spacing of 660 feet in this area. And let's say I want to use 200-foot cells. And then the system will figure out how many rows and columns it would need to do that little box. Next slide. And got a couple of images here. Here's the top of the model from the regional model, and then a zoom in on the inset that was carved out. So next slide. And this is, as I said, we fed it into a shapefile of the streams. And on the right, you can see a new stream network. And those little red dots are locations of wells from the parent model that got inherited by the inset model, or the child model, if we're going to go with parent and child for the terminology. The reason to do an inset is that the smaller model will run faster, and there may be some other features that the analysts would like to add, like the regional model doesn't have all the streams, or maybe doesn't have some surface water features or some wetlands. And the analyst wants to know, are those other features important for the impact of a new well on the stream flow? So, you know, the purpose of the inset was really to give you a starting place for a more refined look, for example, under a site-specific review, but it could be for other, you know, broad purposes of design. Next slide. And this is just an image of the heads that came out, the groundwater elevations in layer one that came out of a run. And kind of the highlight of this is just the model on the right is the inset model. And you can see that like the stream channel is better refined. On the left, it's a little blurry. There were bigger cells. The river cells were bigger. And on the right, you get a little better definition. And you could also see in the lower right, there were some wells, and you don't really see their effect on the left-hand panel. There's a couple little bullseyes, but on the right, there's more little bullseyes of drawdown around individual wells. So yeah, so insetting could just lead to a little bit better definition. Next slide. So we're trying to design it so that the user just tells the system what the bounding box and the cell size is. In order to do that, there's going to be a lot of work done by what we call the hydrologic framework administrator. So someone from the staff there at Eagle, or by contract to MSU, or whoever is going to do this background work for the system, will have to, after a regional model is selected for insetting, we'll have to go through a process of trying it out, making sure all the packages get inherited properly. Look if there's boundaries that you want to stay away from. So maybe defining an area within the regional model that's acceptable for insets, and then doing a bunch of testing to make sure that they're pretty happy with the results. I mean, it's going to be kind of a buyer beware system. It's meant to serve as a starting place for the modeler, but we want to make sure that the starting place is a good place to start, and not not giving you some kind of strange initial configuration. And I haven't seen a model that totally fails, but we haven't tested that many. It's a pretty new system, that this ModFlow setup tool that my colleague has developed. That software is available to people. It's a released package, so if someone wanted to download ModFlow setup, they can get the original software. But I'm going to say there's probably a model there that's going to fail. So it's going to be a learning process over the next few months, with some testing and work through the system. All right, next slide. I think in the spring council meeting, I presented a bunch of slides on recharge estimation that we are doing to produce estimates that are transient. Right now, the available recharge layer from the state is from the Groundwater Inventory and Map project from about 15 years ago, and it's a steady state long-term recharge. And we're working on a transit recharge set of estimates, and we're be working on getting preliminary estimates from that to the support committee for the MHF for their review. Next slide. And here's an example from a gauge near Kalamazoo, looking at the recharge for the upstream catchment. The red line is the long-term average recharge at just less than 12 inches. The blue line is the long-term average recharge from the new soil water balance estimate, which is slightly higher. And the black line are annual values of recharge as we years. The time period, as you can see, is 1996 to 2001. So I think we will capture a lot of transient models that would be developed for use in the water withdrawal program or other programs. And again, just kind of a starting place for people who are interested in putting a model together, give them a starting place for recharge. One of the reasons the blue line's a little higher than the red line is like around in the 70s. Since then, Michigan's been experiencing higher precipitation than we did from 1920 through 1970. So when we use long-term stream gauge records to estimate recharge, and if it includes a significant number of years before 1970, then the estimate will be a little bit lower than a post-1970 estimate. And those kind of questions we'll have to work out through models and data committee and the MHF work group. Next slide, please. And finally, one of the tasks that we are tackling through the Michigan Hydrologic Framework is this idea of meta models. as we know, the screening tool is based on analytics solution that's fast. It can run in a a web browser, and it can be useful for screening. As more water management areas reach zone C and D, the analysts there at Eagle are looking at full numerical models like ModFlow models to incorporate better the conditions out in the field, the hydrologic setting. But those are time consuming to produce. And you wouldn't be able to run a model if they get a model that they're happy with. You can't really do a run within a browser. And so there was an idea that maybe there's a way to statistically capture the ModFlow behavior and potentially replace the analytics solution with this statistical model to provide us like a intermediate screening tool that would prevent site-specific review if all that was going to happen is ask for site-specific review, the analyst puts it in a full ModFlow model, does all the runs, and then comes back and says it's okay. Maybe there's a bridge in between that. And so our goal for the MHF is to test and then demonstrate methods to the work group for consideration. And I think the last slide is next. There's two kind of main techniques that can be used. The papers on the right are meta modeling papers where we use statistical methods like neural networks, or I don't know, there's lots of different names. And the two on the left are based on these things called capture maps, where you in the model put a well in every fifth cell or every other cell or whatever, and you look at its impact and you just store all those impacts. And then later on, someone could come in and say, I want a well here. And you've pre-computed what the impacts would be, and you could just report those back. The reason I'm not in the room now is because we're in Madison now. Brent here speaking, I from our shop, working with colleagues here in Madison on setting up these tests. And yeah, we're pretty excited about seeing if this will be a useful tool for Eagle and for the water use advisory process.
Thank you, Howard.
I think that's it for me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Probably don't have time for, well, we probably have time for one question, but maybe not a response. So I would say that if anybody does have any technical follow-up questions, try to email Howard or always Dave as the liaison to get answers if any of this triggered questions. Thank you for any.
So I appreciate the work these guys are doing. It was really great science to get coming to life. I asked them not to show real-time session, but they're showing real-time. Get to do this stuff, so it was cool.
A lot of progress, and I appreciate everybody who's involved in it. I'm going to speed through a couple things. Doug Needham with the implementation committee let me know before he had to leave that they have no report. Data committee, we really have no substantive report other than I asked Ralph Hefner to help assist just kind of keeping the committee going. You might formally remember him, USGS. He's helping try to limit it out right now. For a few months, I'm going to have some tough time capacity issues, and I didn't want to slow everything down. So he's graciously volunteered to help keep things going. He knows all the agenda items. He's going to be reaching out to different presenters and schedule meetings and keep things on track. So if you see something from him, it's to be future meeting dates. The key one is our next meeting is on February 10th, and committee, Emily's committee will let everybody know if there's a convenient and adjacent meeting of your committee that you could take advantage of that may not normally pop in. The other dates are listed there on the agenda. They've been sent out. Make sure to plug those into your calendars, and the ones with asterisks next to them are going to be the ones that are especially important to be in person for forum and voting purposes as compared to online board. So please make special note, do everything you can to attend at least those in person if at all possible. Are there buyers for open comments? This is the opportunity to give any for up to 3 minutes or things that were not on the agenda. So you'll let me know if anybody raises any hand online.
No one so far.
We'll close open comments for now. And I'd just like to thank everybody. Hopefully you felt like you got your money's worth out of today's meeting. It wasn't perfunctory. Eagle staff, thanks for all the work that you've been doing on a bunch of these issues that we heard about today. Thank you, partners, for all the progress that you're making as we move next forward. So appreciate it. And because we don't have to ask for a motion, we are adjourned.
Bye, everybody.
4-1.
Thanks, everybody.
Cut this upstairs or me upstairs.
Well, very quick question.